541. This time a great harvest. Scott looked confident, but Mr. Jeffrey would not be outdone. He spoke through the silver giants. Even the true Ymir cannot defeat my soldiers. At his command, the silver giants moved as one. 15 of them fanned out into a semicircle, converging on Scott's 5 ice giants. As they ran, their bodies deformed. Some stretched into long spears, some thinned into blades, some swelled into heavy hammers. The 5 ice giants roared in unison, exhaling a blast of pale blue cold. Frost quickly formed across the surfaces of the silver bodies, slowing their advance. In unison, the ice giants extended their hands. Invisible cold condensed into tangible blades of ice. Shields and greatswords of ice materialized, and the giants stepped forward. Countless sharp protrusions sprang up on the smooth silver forms, scraping away the frost as they twisted. The enormous greatswords in the ice giants' hands rose, and the two formations clashed in an instant. Silver light flashed wildly, cold swirled, mercury-like liquid spilled across the ground, and ice shards scattered. "They can't break the ice giants' defenses," Helena observed, surprised. Indeed, every weapon the silver giants formed was stopped by the ice shields and armor. Their attacks left only scratches. They could not penetrate the ice giants' defenses. The ice shields and armor were self-repairing, while the silver giants' fluid bodies could not withstand the greatswords. When cut, they were sliced into pieces and then eroded by the cold. The omnipresent frost impeded their movement. "How is that possible?" Mr. Jeffrey could not accept it. "It's not impossible," Scott replied. "Time moves forward, and wizardry keeps developing. Generally, things progress." "Arrogance," Mr. Jeffrey shot back. "Do you mean the puppets you casually summoned have surpassed the Ymir our Agaste alchemists painstakingly made?" "I already said they're low-end Ymir replicas," Scott answered calmly. "In raw power and magical application, they're inferior to real Ymir. One thing they do have, though, is defense. I'm confident of that. Their defenses have outstripped the originals." Mr. Jeffrey fell silent. Helena added, "You don't need overwhelming attack power to deal with these constructs." Scott nodded. Presumably, because they can separate, recombine, and regenerate, Mr. Jeffrey didn't load them with many defensive measures. "I haven't lost yet," Mr. Jeffrey's voice came again. "My soldiers cannot be destroyed. Even if their bodies split, they regenerate automatically." "That's true," Scott said, watching the battlefield. The silver giants repeatedly split, rejoined, and regenerated under the ice giants' assault. The ice giants tried to freeze and trap parts of them, but the silver forms escaped whenever the frost thickened. On the surface, the 5 ice giants seemed to be ruthlessly dominating the 15 silver giants, a total rout, but in effect, neither side could finish the other. "Don't forget, I haven't joined the fight yet." Scott drew his wand. "You still have magic power?" Mr. Jeffrey sounded more surprised than before. "You must know the layout inside Gungnir Tower, right?" Scott did not hide it. "I obtained a great deal of pure magical power there, forged magic crystals, and completed the super magic advancement ritual." "So that's it. They actually succeeded." Mr. Jeffrey's voice turned dejected. At the same moment, all the silver giants halted. Their shapes dissolved and flowed across the floor like ordinary mercury. Scott lowered his wand. From a dark corner inside the pyramid, Jeffrey's soul body drifted out. It hovered, facing Scott. Without being prompted, it began to speak. The Gungnir Tower was the masterpiece of some of the finest alchemists at the Agaste school. It has always served as a guardian, protecting our base, the Golden Palace, from invasion. If it weren't for that damned traitor, the Golden Palace hidden at the tower's base would be the safest place in the world. "The safest place?" Helena asked. Scott passed through that inverted tower and entered the Golden Palace on his own. Mr. Jeffrey was not angry, he explained patiently. "They modified it. Since the prophecy about an inheritor appeared, the tower has had 2 operating mechanisms." Scott guessed aloud, "For the church's special forces and for ordinary wizards, respectively?" "Exactly," Mr. Jeffrey confirmed. "Church personnel will never survive the entry. Other wizards only face trials." Helena asked, "What if the church forces a wizard to enter to fetch treasure?" "Impossible," Mr. Jeffrey said. "Wizards and the church are mortal enemies. Those wizards who would defect to the church would not have the ability to enter the Golden Palace." "That's truly difficult," Scott murmured. If not for his special transfiguration talent and the summoned beasts he created, he could never have passed those checkpoints. Not to mention the lethal curse that lingered in the tower. Scott only got through because he had artifacts that could resist curses. Otherwise, the tower extending to the Earth's core would have remained a death trap. He was curious. The tower can distinguish the Church's special forces? Is there something different about them? Because of faith. Both Mr. Jeffrey and Ravenclaw in the painting answered. Scott understood immediately. It came back to the same idea. Magic is the power of belief. Even though it's all magic, the fluctuations differ depending on the user and their inheritance. A druid's magic, for example, is purer and closer to nature. The Church's special forces, brainwashed by the Church, possessed fanatical faith. Unwavering faith changes their minds and the nature of their magic. Absolute pure magic power, back then it was only conjecture, Mr. Jeffrey said, voice full of feeling. No one could be certain their conversion device truly worked. Now it seems they did, Scott said. How lucky you are, Scott. That purity is the result of continuous conversion for over 1,000 years. It's the most precious gift for the inheritor. Scott smiled faintly. I should be grateful to the ancient Agazde wizards who left their ideals behind. That's no longer my ideal. Mr. Jeffrey sounded resigned. At least it was once your ideal, Scott offered. That's true. Mr. Scott. Jeffrey gave a hollow laugh. But now I only want to be reborn. His soul body turned into a gray mist and surged toward Scott. The nauseatingly evil magic in the mist made Scott raise his wand at once. Expecto Patronum. Silver light blossomed like moonlight. A nimble peregrine falcon formed in the light and darted into the gray mist. Wherever it flew, the mist recoiled. The falcon danced inside the swirling fog. Under the silver glow, the mist thinned. A shriek issued from within, and then the mist dissipated completely. Is he dead? Helena asked. Unless we destroy his Horcrux, he won't truly die, Scott replied, lowering his wand. But he's definitely much weaker. Lambeau asked, why didn't he hide earlier? If he had, Scott might never have found him. Scott shrugged. He must have known he had no chance. Maybe this was his last desperate gambit. He didn't pry into Mr. Jeffrey's motives. Instead, he acted. He leapt down. Horace cried and soared over, catching the falling Scott and carrying him toward the pyramid. Near the breach in the wall, Scott jumped off Horace's back, passed through the hole, and returned to the pyramid's interior. He paused at the entrance. Soon the magic mirror, the small picture frame, and Helena floated over. Scott re-entered the studio where the beast-hide scrolls were stored and stretched his magical senses to the limit. It didn't take long to find the most peculiar scroll among the countless beast-hide scrolls. This should be the Horcrux. He reached for the stone shelf. You want to do what? Mr. Jeffrey's voice came again, thin and dull. His soul body was nearly transparent. He was clearly on the verge of collapse. Scott ignored the plea and took the scroll. After holding it, he was certain this was the Horcrux. But having found it presented a new problem. How do I destroy it? In the original tales, Horcruxes were destroyed by Fiendfire, the sword of Gryffindor, or Basilisk Fangs. Scott knew no Fiendfire, and he had no sword or Basilisk Fangs. He placed the scroll on the floor and tested Gungnir, both the original and a version fused with the 4 elements. Yet the seemingly fragile scroll would not break. Ravenclaw in the painting said, you have 2 choices. Learn Fiendfire or find the advanced Gungnir knowledge. I choose the second, Scott said. At that moment, the beast-hide scroll, having been probed and prodded, automatically unfurled. Congratulations, inheritor. Mr. Jeffrey's voice whispered in Scott's mind. You are now qualified to inherit all our knowledge and wealth. Thank you, I know. Scott began a clumency decisively. He instructed Lambeau to carry the scroll out of the pyramid and commanded the ice giant to form a huge block of ice and freeze the scroll at its center. Mr. Jeffrey's remnant soul followed the Horcrux out and hovered near the ice block, guarding it. Scott didn't pay much attention to him. It's a pity Yggdrasil failed just now, Scott said, trying the ritual he still couldn't get to work. Banishment to another dimension would have been the ideal sealing method. This is enough, Ravenclaw said with a smile. As long as you avoid direct contact, the Horcrux won't affect you. Even close contact will have minimal influence. That thing truly can't affect me. Scott gazed back at the stone shelf, now emptied of the most important scroll. but the evil magical residue makes me not want to get too close. Horcruxes are indeed the most wicked invention, Ravenclaw agreed. Scott began pulling other beast-hide scrolls from the shelves and flipping through them. This record's an alchemical method I've never seen before. A lost potion recipe. Several improved charms, ancient versions. Oh, there's even a complete magical planting plan. He felt like a mouse in a grain jar, overjoyed. He didn't rush to hunt for advanced Gungnir knowledge right away. Instead, he spent the next 2 days classifying and organizing every beast-hide scroll. He inventoried, registered, and numbered them, then moved them out of the pyramid into the Odin's Eye space outside the giant pit and shelved them in his study. 2 walls of bookshelves were filled. Scott smiled with satisfaction and recited his findings aloud. 241 pieces of alchemy knowledge, 68 of which are of significant reference value. 196 potion recipes, including 18 usable lost recipes. 283 pieces of spatial magic knowledge, 91 inspiring. 164 pieces of dark arts knowledge. 573 pieces of charm knowledge, 39 of which are still practical. The rest cover astronomy, divination, magical creatures, 1,637 pieces in total. In short, this was a great harvest. Congratulations, Scott, Ravenclaw said from her picture frame, sounding excited. Having inherited an ancient school's entire knowledge, you could found a wizarding house with a profound legacy, top tier. Scott scratched his head and changed the subject. But I still haven't found the advanced Gungnir knowledge, and there's no sign of a hidden chamber of secrets in the pyramid. Perhaps you should ask Mr. Jeffrey, Helena suggested. Scott hesitated. If he could avoid it, he didn't want to communicate with Mr. Jeffrey in his current limp remnant soul state. 542. Treasure House, Hidden Wealth. To search for advanced knowledge of Gungnir, Scott and Helena left the Odin's Eye space and returned to the rim of the giant pit. Helena and Golzan, both capable of phasing through walls and earth, had already combed the pyramid inside and out and still found no hidden chamber of secrets. So next, we'll have to search among these ruins, Scott said. Beyond the pyramid, the wreckage of collapsed buildings spread for an area no smaller than Hogwarts grounds. Helena frowned. If we search carefully, this could take ages. You can wait in the villa. She began to drift down, but Scott stopped her. Golzan was transfigured by me. If I can make one, I can make many. He knelt, thrust his wand into the earth with a backhanded motion, and mounds rose up one after another. From them crawled Komodo-like beasts, 3 meters long, ugly and fierce. Hundreds emerged and gathered at his feet. Scott stood and surveyed them, satisfied. Limited by the materials, their bodies aren't as sturdy as Golzan's, but they'll do for searching. Helena tilted her head. If you wanted, could you transfigure the whole ground here? I could, Scott said, but I won't. He shook his head. If there really is a chamber of secrets, being too rough might trigger whatever failsafe's inside. Golzan, he called, and Golzan's massive head pushed up through the earth. Lead the pack. Search the entire giant pit, underground and the surrounding rock faces. Find any possible chambers of secrets. Golzan nodded, roared, and the Komodos followed it, slipping back into the ground to continue the search. Scott glanced down at the huge ice block below where the Horcrux lay frozen and at Mr. Jeffrey guarding it. Mr. Jeffrey's soul form looked less faded, but he hadn't regained consciousness, still stupidly intent on watching the ice. Scott wasn't worried. The 5 ice giants he had created were on guard there, and they had already separated and refrozen the mercury that had melted from the silver giants into larger ice blocks. Let's go back, he said, and led Helena into the Odin's Eye space. Over the next days, Scott buried himself in the beast skin scrolls taken from the pyramid. He dove into the alchemical sections first. The scrolls contained a vast amount of ancient alchemical lore, much of it obsolete or missing critical ingredients after a millennium, but the ideas and methods were still valuable. Even the Ravenclaw portrait leaned in with keen interest. With her to discuss things, Scott absorbed and mastered the material far faster. The most valuable discovery was the process for creating alchemical puppets, not only the steps that had created Ymir, but also records of the silver giants Mr. Jeffrey had made. Scott had always called them silver giants, but the original texts named the puppets slaughter fluid, constructs with boundless transfiguration and self-restoration. As expected, their one true counter was fiendfire. Nothing else consistently destroyed them. Unfortunately, several necessary ingredients for constructing such puppets had vanished from the world. Scott's attention turned to the frozen slaughter fluid he had found below. If he could recover the components there, he might synthesize superior materials and upgrade his summoned beasts. Lambo was the exception. Scott intended to keep it. The other 4 combat summons were becoming redundant. Scott could perform their roles himself, and better. He had kept them out of convenience. Even if they were destroyed, he could create replacements by transfiguration, but materials mattered. The summoned beast's skills came from rune circuits, and rune circuits were constrained by both the inscriber and the quality of materials. Scott began to plan ways to synthesize improved alloys through alchemy, though that too would demand rare raw materials. Or, he thought, perhaps once Mr. Jeffrey's Horcrux was destroyed, he would gain access to those 15 slaughter fluid directly. Helena reminded him, "Jeffrey said you would inherit Agaste's knowledge and wealth. You've only inherited part of the knowledge. I haven't seen any wealth yet," Scott replied. He didn't trust the promise entirely. Mr. Jeffrey might be raising the stakes to lure him into a trap. So far, beneath the Gungnir Tower and in the Niflheim Ice Palace, Scott had found knowledge rather than treasure. The Ravenclaw mentor suggested a practical lead. If you have the patience to dismantle the ruined buildings and analyze them with alchemy, you could extract useful materials. Scott's eyes brightened. He had overlooked that. He also suddenly recalled the Golden Palace and the giant Odin statue there. Its golden eyes had magical restorative power, capable even of repairing destroyed statues. He felt a pang. He might have missed out on a fortune. Fortunately, both places weren't sealed forever. The Golden Palace would require waiting for the summer solstice, but the Niflheim realm could be revisited any time, especially now that the Voldemort trapped inside had vanished. "I'll go have a look," he said, and left the villa. Helena and Lambo followed. Outside the Odin's Eye space, Scott could sense Golzin's progress more clearly. The Komodo pack was still hard at work. They had searched most of the area and had found a place they couldn't penetrate. Scott sent the remote command to continue and didn't go investigate the newly discovered chamber right away. He wanted the pack to finish the sweep in case there were multiple chambers. He focused instead on the building debris, the broken stones and carved blocks. He ordered the 5 ice giants below to start demolishing and recycling the ruins. Then Scott transformed into a peregrine falcon and flew to an open area that had once been a small plaza. Drawing his wand, he cast a hurricane-like blast that swept the debris clear and revealed a smooth stone floor, perfect for large-scale alchemical work. All day, he engraved vast alchemical arrays into the plaza's surface with a precise cutting charm. When twilight fell, he finished 2 intersecting large arrays and placed the magic crystal he carried at their center. The crystal flared. Complex patterns along the arrays ignited like light strips. Helena watched. "They're running automatically now?" Scott nodded. "I don't need to attend this place personally. The ice giants will toss building materials into the array, and it will separate useful components. This side handles separation. The other side will analyze and catalog. I just wait for the harvest." He felt a stab of regret as the crystal's brilliance dimmed ever so slightly. Each use of the magic crystal burned through its stored magic, but the system was set. Golzon and the others finished exploring. They found 2 chambers of secrets, Helena reported. They headed toward one in the ruins to the left of the pyramid. The structure before them was long ruined, but its lines suggested a temple. Helena passed through the wreckage and peered at a stone relief. "Incomplete divine figures," she said. Scott cleared the final debris with a sweep of his wand. "Whatever it was originally doesn't matter. We just want the hidden chamber." He studied a relatively intact stone slab covered in runes. "Is this an original rune inscription?" He knocked the slab. It was thick, and he couldn't tell whether it hid a hollow. He tried to pass through it. Helena couldn't either. Lambo suggested using brute force. "We can try Yggdrasil," Scott said, remembering the method that had opened the last chamber of secrets in the Niflheim Ice Palace. He invoked the word and carved white runes that formed a tree-like pattern. A circular aperture opened in the slab and widened. Scott waved Helena forward. She floated through and returned moments later, glowing. I was right, she said. It's a treasury, materials and galleons. Scott's eyes lit up. He jumped into the passage. It slid like a tubular, twisting chute, more like a water park slide than Hogwarts's straight, smooth, secret passage. Curves and turns blurred his sense of direction, and after several minutes, he landed at the bottom. Helena and Lambo arrived behind him. Lambo forgot to fly. It simply stared dumbfounded at the glittering galleons and gems. Torches around the vault burned with an ancient, unquenchable flame. Stacks of chests overflowed with old galleons and colored gems that flashed and winked. Against one wall rose a stone shelving unit taller than 20 stories, lined with labeled containers holding a dazzling variety of magical reagents. Scott walked through the aisles, stunned. Before Mr. Jeffrey's body died, he lived in this secret realm for decades. How can there still be so much left? Maybe he couldn't get in all along, Helena offered. Scott could fuss about explanations later. He opened a chest and turned over an old galleon. The coinage is different from the goblin-minted galleons now, he said, then tossed it back. That makes sense. Goblins controlling the wizard banks is a relatively recent development. He moved on to the gems. Many of these stones hold magical power, he said. I've never seen natural gems that contained magic. Because wizards mined the good ones long ago, Helena said. Later alchemists had to synthesize power gems. Scott reached the massive stone shelf and began reading the labels aloud in a half-whisper, feeling more and more like a child in a candy store. Dragon blood, dragon bones, dragon hearts, basilisk eyes, phoenix tail feathers, phoenix blood, unicorn blood, cleansed of curses. He kept naming jars and containers as he walked, disbelief and excitement rising. So many reagents that had vanished from the wider magical world were here, stacked in neat rows and bathed in torchlight. The scale of it made his pulse quicken. Lost materials, rare reagents, ancient wealth, everything a wizard alchemist could dream of. This haul is more than a little unexpected. Scott swallowed, forcing down the excitement. And it's the biggest fortune I've ever seen. Helena was just as stunned. All of this is yours now. Do you think? Scott glanced again at the ancient galleons. If I wanted to exchange these for modern galleons, would the goblins at Gringotts take them? I don't know. Helena shook her head. Those coins aren't the same style I used when I was alive. They're much older. Doesn't matter. They're all gold. Scott decided not to worry about it for the moment. Come on, let's get everything back to the villa. Lambo piped up loudly. From now on, I can stay there and guard the galleons and gems. You just want a shiny nest, Scott said, exposing the creature's true motive. That's not a conflict, Lambo protested, trying to sound indignant. Scott didn't press it. He reached into a chest, scooped up a handful of gems, and tucked them into his pocket. Let's go see the other Chamber of Secrets. He headed toward the pipe slide entrance. Lambo followed at once. Aren't we going to move all this first? There'll be plenty of time to deal with treasure, Scott replied. Right now, the important thing is learning the advanced version of Gungnir. You're remarkably composed. Helena sighed. I almost forgot about the other chamber when I saw all that wealth. Stuff like that won't vanish if we leave it for a while. Scott shifted into a peregrine falcon and shot into the pipe slide. A few minutes later, he emerged through the slab-lined passage and flew straight over the square where the alchemical array was running. He circled once and landed, reverting to human form. The giants were bustling. They hauled mountains of building material into the large array. As it hummed to life, bits of magically attuned matter peeled away and streamed into a smaller array, which purified, organized, and categorized them. Even after all that effort, the useful yield was meager, only a few fist-sized chunks of metal from piles of stone and timber. Scott halted the giants with a clap of his hands and climbed into the center, removing the magic crystal that sat in the array's heart. The light winked out, and the array immediately ceased. He inspected the crystal. It looked the same, but to Scott it had shrunk slightly. The sensation left him uneasy. He quickly pocketed the crystal. Why are you putting it away? Helena asked, puzzled. I thought you wanted the array running. I do, but trading off that pure, well-organized magic for a handful of alchemical materials is a bad deal. Scott frowned. The crystal contained ancient, highly compatible pure mana that had accumulated over more than 1,000 years, too valuable to burn for scraps. He pulled a few of the gems from his pocket instead. "I'll try these." He set one on the array. It glowed faintly, and the machinery resumed its work. Helena warned, "Remember, natural magic gems are non-renewable too." "I know." Scott tossed the rest of his gems into the array. "But there are a lot of them." He signaled the giants to continue, and they obeyed. "Are we going to the other Chamber of Secrets now?" Helena asked. Scott glanced at his wristwatch. "It's already noon. Maybe you should." "No," he cut in, producing a sandwich and eating as he walked. To the other Chamber of Secrets. The chamber lay in a cliff behind the pyramid. After finishing, Scott changed into a falcon again and flew with Helena and Lambo. At a precise point, they struck the stone face and passed cleanly through. They landed, became human, and Scott snapped his fingers. Magic coalesced into countless motes of light that floated through the darkness, illuminating a gloomy corridor. At the corridor's end, Golzin, their scout, guarded a huge stone door. Scott patted the giant's head. At his touch, Golzin shrank rapidly and was tucked into Scott's pocket. Helena reached out to the stone door and shook her head. "I still can't enter." Having encountered similar wards before, she kept her voice steady. Scott drew his wand and said, "Yggdrasil." A circular aperture opened in the door, and he ducked through. He snapped his fingers again, and the motes of light streamed into the chamber, revealing its interior. "It's the same as the chamber in the Ice Palace," Helena observed, floating up to look at the tall black stone tablet in the center. Scott turned back to the sealed exit. The passage in the door winked closed behind him. "Seems I'll have to master the advanced Gungnir to get out," he said. "Did you bring enough food?" Helena asked, practical as ever. "Don't worry, I'm prepared." He smiled. He set to work. First, he made careful rubbings of every rune on the black tablet, pressing parchment to stone until the shape stood clear. Then he propped himself against the wall and began studying the copies until his eyes ached. Days blurred into one another. He, Helena, and Lambo remained in that cold chamber. Scott read and practiced without pause. 18 days passed. Finally he stood, wand in hand. "Gungnir," he commanded. Golden light crystallized out of the air and formed an exquisitely wrought spear. It hovered between reality and illusion, its tip shimmering with lethal precision. With a thought from Scott, the spear launched, passing clean through the heavy stone door as though it were air. The door shattered into rubble. The spear whipped back and, finding the black tablet, sliced through it as well. The tablet exploded into black fragments. Scott stared at the pile of rubble, a touch disappointed. He waved his wand up and down, searching for a reward, but nothing manifested. "You've already gained a lot," Helena said with a wry smile. "We should be content." Scott sheathed his wand. "Come on, death has been waiting for Jeffrey long enough." Gungnir. The golden spear drove through the ice and through the frozen beast-skin scroll trapped inside it. With a high, keening cry, a jet of pure black liquid seeped from the rent in the scroll. Beside it, Mr. Jeffrey's soul began to glow a clear white, his previously blurred features sharpened. "You've won, young man." He sounded calm, as if he had expected this end. "Farewell, Mr. Jeffrey," Scott said evenly. Mr. Jeffrey said nothing more. He simply faded away. "He's gone just like that?" Helena still sounded dazed. Scott shrugged. "The Horcrux was destroyed. He returns to death's embrace." Helena looked disappointed. "I thought he'd have more to say, some confession, some urging to carry on Agaste's dream." Scott gave a small, amused shake of his head. "Villains delivering touching last words and repenting at the end. That's drama, not reality." He turned toward another hidden chamber of secrets. "Pack up. Time to leave." A few days later, Scott came back with his haul. He'd retraced his route, Argentina, then a long passenger flight to Britain, and it was already December. He didn't linger in London. After informing Dumbledore, he went straight to the headmaster's office through the leaky cauldron's fireplace. "Welcome back, Scott." Dumbledore smiled from behind his desk. "Welcome back, Grey Lady." "Thank you, Professor." Scott sank onto the sofa. Everything went fairly smoothly. Mr. Jeffrey had been an unexpected complication, but not a long one. Dumbledore didn't press for details. Instead, he beamed. "You've returned just in time. Madam Bones's application was approved. Before Christmas, the Order of Merlin will hold an investiture, and you will receive a first-class order." Scott had almost forgotten the matter. The news lifted his mood. Glad I didn't miss it. And one more thing, Dumbledore added. You've been awarded the Hogwarts Special Contribution Award. Scott blinked. Special Contribution Award? It's overdue, Dumbledore said with a fond smile. Between the Triwizard Tournament and your role in Voldemort's defeat, you should have received recognition long ago. Apologies for the delay. Dumbledore waved it off. That's all. Go on. Your friends are eager to see you. Thanks, Professor. Scott stood and left. Helena drifted through the wall and left at once. Scott took the self-turning staircase down. As he stepped into the corridor, he was met by a chorus of voices, Fred and George leading the chant. Welcome our Special Contribution Award recipient, Hogwarts Student Council President, the brave warrior who helped defeat the Dark Lord, the youngest great adventurer, Scott Trollope, making a dazzling entrance. Thunderous clapping followed. Scott paused, half smiling, half embarrassed. He wanted to disappear. Why no red carpet? He muttered, trying to ignore the rest of the students and moving forward to high-five his friends. Oh, next time I'll have a red carpet ready, Fred promised. What pattern do you want? George asked. Welcome back. Roger bumped him on the shoulder. Eddie shook his hand with mock solemnity. Mr. Trollope, I'd like to discuss a few sure-profit investments, he said, grinning. You'll be interested, I guarantee. Ignore the greedy businessman. Milton joked for once. He's after your fortune. Luna looked up at Scott, eyes luminous. Welcome back. Congratulations. You've obtained the key to victory. She blinked as if waking from a daydream. Thank you, Luna, Scott said, genuinely pleased. The weeks after felt calm. The wizarding world breathed easier. Voldemort had vanished. His Death Eaters were tried and sent to Azkaban, and the dark creatures the Dark Lord had rallied were being driven off by Aurors. It was as if a long, clouded sky had cleared and sunlight finally came through. But in the room of requirement, among the members of the Babel Tower, the mood was sober. We all know what's coming, Roger said. Scott faces an enemy more terrifying than Voldemort. They were quiet for a moment. Milton added, People are still celebrating, but we know a deeper darkness remains. I've been preparing, Scott replied. I just need more time. He hadn't finished modifying the summoned beast, and his command of the supermagic Gungnir wasn't flawless. He needed time to master both. Medea still hasn't shown herself, Helena reported. I've had ghosts searching Britain, but nothing. Perhaps she's hiding abroad, Eddie offered. Scott downplayed it. Medea isn't the main worry anymore. With Voldemort gone, the curse binding her might have loosened, or it might have cut off what she needed to fully recover. She won't be the threat she used to be. What matters is Salazar Slytherin, Luna said. I contacted Savannah. The druids aren't ready yet. The passage can't be opened before I'm ready, Scott said. Even if the druids are prepared, it's useless unless I am. Fred and George brightened. Can we go in with you? What if it's Avalon? Shut up! Angelina and Alicia snapped in unison, chastising the twins before Scott even spoke. Now's not the time for that, Scott said with a smile. Back to business. About Babel Tower's recruitment, any candidates you recommend? Roger asked. I recommend Caccini Strozzi, Roger said at once. Faces turned his way. He didn't flinch. What's wrong? He snapped lightly. Scott cleared his throat. Show of hands. Angelina and Alicia raised theirs first. Under their stares, even Fred and George raised their hands. The rest followed. Caccini was accepted unanimously. Explain Babel Tower to Caccini, Scott told Roger, handing over a piece of parchment. This is a confidentiality contract. It isn't because we expect her to leak secrets on purpose, but to prevent someone from magically forcing her to spill information. I understand. Roger folded the parchment. This is serious. Every one of us signed a contract. No exceptions. Scott looked around. Any other candidates? Everyone shook their heads. Then Scott raised his hand. I recommend Cedric Diggory and Jacob Kent. Both had come to him in different ways. Cedric, curious about the group he'd seen disappearing into the room of requirement, had offered himself. Jacob had shown up, enthusiastic and insistent that Scott must let him join whatever this new faction was. Scott had probed both and found them acceptable. The vote passed by majority. Jacob did not get unanimous support because many didn't know him. Roger, in particular, disliked him. Cedric lost a few votes thanks to the twins' petty grumbles. Scott resumed the meeting. I need to go to the ministry, specifically the Hall of Prophecy in the Department of Mysteries. I have to get the prophecy about me. He'd postponed this for some time, first because Medea was dormant and the orb safe, but now that Voldemort was gone and Medea might be awake, it was urgent to either secure the orb or destroy it. Must you go in person? Roger asked. Only those named in a prophecy can retrieve its orb, Helena explained. So yes, he must go himself. Fred and George lit up. We can help. We'll infiltrate the ministry and steal it for you. Polyjuice, George suggested. Or replace an unspeakable, Eddie mused. Obliviate them. Take their place? Ministry wards could detect polyjuice. Scott will need an escape plan, Milton added. Scott's expression hardened. Put away these illegal and dangerous plans. I won't have any of you breaking into the ministry. No. Well, Milton waved his hands, embarrassed. Eddie brightened, then remembered himself. Actually, there's a legal way. Minister Bones would probably grant my request. Scott laughed. Exactly. I'll ask Madame Bones herself for permission to take the prophecy orb. Boring, Fred and George muttered in unison. Scott stood. Meeting adjourned. Afterward, he called Cedric and Jacob to an empty classroom. Our group is called Babel Tower. We're united by a common ideal. Jacob immediately blurted, So you're helping rule the wizarding world? Scott rubbed his forehead. He produced 2 parchments instead of explanations. Sign this confidentiality contract and you'll become members. I can only tell you more after you're accepted. Cedric scanned the contract carefully. Jacob signed without hesitation, eyes bright with eagerness. Aren't you being hasty? Cedric asked. Scott looked at Jacob and admitted, I trust you. You have nothing to plot against me, and most of your friends are already in. Thanks, Jacob said simply. Cedric spent a moment longer considering, then signed too. Now can you tell us? He asked, curiosity plain. Scott smiled and produced the magic mirror. Not from me. Eddie will explain. He called, Eddie, come to the first classroom in the left corridor on the 3rd floor. Scott had no desire to field a dozen questions himself. He would leave the talking to Eddie, the gossip expert, the chatterbox prince, and the Babel Tower's minister of propaganda. 545. Honoring ceremony graves. After dinner that evening, Scott finally received the message he'd been waiting for from William. She's awake. I haven't seen her yet, but I can feel it, William replied. Scott answered quickly. Are there any signs? William's response came almost immediately. I don't know. There are no obvious signs, but I just feel like something's wrong. She must be back. Maybe everyone is just too quiet. Scott understood. Often confirmation didn't require concrete proof. Small, easily overlooked clues could trigger a subconscious alarm. Call it intuition. He sent a few more messages. Please calm down. We've been searching for her whereabouts. If you find anything, tell me immediately. I understand. Remember what you promised me. After he finished messaging William, Scott didn't dwell on it. Medea had awakened from the curse, but had not yet revealed herself. The whole wizarding council she led had gone silent. Whether she was recuperating or secretly plotting, worrying would do no good. All he could do was use every moment to strengthen himself. He'd arranged with Professor Flitwick to borrow the Ravenclaw diadem from time to time, using its power to accelerate his understanding of newly learned knowledge. Flitwick himself was engrossed in the new discoveries Scott shared. Time rushed forward to the last weekend before Christmas. That morning, Scott, accompanied by Dumbledore, arrived at the rebuilt Merlin Order headquarters. He wasn't the only one being honored that day. When they arrived, many elegantly dressed witches and wizards had already gathered in the courtyard. Dumbledore and Scott's arrival drew a lot of attention. Albus, old friend, a wizard called out as he came over to greet Dumbledore, naturally steering the conversation towards Scott. Scott shook hands with several people, bobbing his head politely. Of course, he also fielded the usual probing questions. Thanks to the spread of the Triwizard Tournament footage, especially Scott's performance in the 3rd round, everyone knew he possessed extraordinary magical skill. Many were curious how someone so young had achieved so much. Although people said flattering things, Scott could sense not everyone had pure intentions. He could perceive the magical nature and fluctuations of those around him, and their true feelings were clear. To the subtle or direct probes, he kept answering that it was all thanks to the careful guidance of Hogwarts professors. Dumbledore, standing nearby, chimed in that Scott was simply a genius. Even so, some wizards persisted, asking about his future plans or whether he had a girlfriend. As Scott answered, he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure slipping quietly into the courtyard. That snake-like glide, the black robe, greasy long hair, the bitter, resentful face. Severus Snape. Scott's head turned, and others followed his gaze. Conversation died away at once. The courtyard went suddenly quiet, but Snape paid no heed. He walked toward Dumbledore and Scott without changing his expression. "Oh, Severus," Dumbledore greeted warmly. "Long time no see." Snape returned nothing but a slight nod and a cool, "Long time no see, Albus." Scott offered a polite smile and stepped forward. "Hello, Professor Snape." "Hello, Mr. Trollope," Snape replied, his black eyes as empty and peculiar as ever. "You don't need to call me Professor, Ravenclaw's champion. I no longer work at Hogwarts." Scott hadn't expected a sarcastic barb so soon. Snape was always unlikable, and he didn't relent. You should be standing with those glamorous people, accepting their compliments, instead of talking to a former Death Eater whom everyone avoids. Scott shrugged. "Aren't you a righteous undercover agent? With the evidence provided by Dumbledore, you were acquitted at the trial." Snape gave an ugly, forced smile. "Should I be grateful, Albus?" "No, that's what I should say, Severus," Dumbledore smiled. "The Daily Prophet even reported your deeds, Mr. Snape," Scott added lightly. "I remember the headline. He is the great Slytherin, a righteous lone hero." "Shut up," Snape snapped, disgust plain on his face. "Don't be shy, Severus," Dumbledore chuckled. "You were brave." Snape's face darkened. "You know very well that everything I did wasn't for some damned righteousness." "It's over now, Severus," Dumbledore began earnestly. "You should learn to reconcile with the past." "Don't lecture me," Snape snapped, irritable. "It's none of your business." Dumbledore shook his head and fell silent. When Madame Bones, the Minister of Magic, arrived, the honors ceremony began. The event felt perfunctory. A representative of the Merlin Order recounted the deeds of wizards who had contributed to the war and presented medals while the crowd applauded with polite smiles. Scott found the display almost as hypocritical as an entertainment award show, but he dutifully went through the motions. He received a shiny first-class medal amid applause. For practical reasons, things would be easier for him in future. He accepted it. Snape received a second-class medal, recognizing his righteous bravery as an undercover agent. He was not cooperative about the ceremony, shuffling through it with a sullen expression and drawing only sparse applause. As they left the stage, Scott clapped and asked softly, "You don't seem very happy." Snape said flatly, "Unlike you, Trollope, this is not something for me to be happy about." "Then why did you come?" Scott pressed. "Because it's deserved, and a Slytherin doesn't refuse honor," Snape said matter-of-factly. At the reception that followed, Scott stayed by Snape's side to avoid endless probes and attempts to win him over. Snape's perpetual gloom kept many would-be conversationalists at bay. Scott gave polite, apologetic smiles, and though Snape clearly knew Scott was using him as a shield, he made no remark about it. In fact, he spoke with Scott intermittently, and for the first time since leaving Hogwarts, Scott found Snape could actually hold a decent conversation. As the dinner wound down, Snape gave Scott a long look. "Mr. Trollope, if you ever encounter a potion you cannot brew, remember to come to your former potions master. If you haven't forgotten what I taught you, you should clearly see I, Severus Snape, am a finer potions master than Damocles Belby." He didn't wait for a response and turned away. Watching his black robe trail as he left, Scott understood why Snape had been less hostile at dinner. He knew Scott had traded the enhancing potion formula with Damocles Belby. "The day before the Christmas holiday, my father wants to meet you," Milton said to Scott unexpectedly. "No problem," Scott replied. "Where?" "My apartment in London," Milton said. "I'll go with you," Scott said. After the holiday, Scott and his friends took the Hogwarts Express to London King's Cross. He parted ways with the others and went with Milton to his flat in an older red brick building. It looked a little dated but tidy. They went through the lobby under the watchful eyes of the manager and climbed the stairs. There was no lift to the 5th floor. Milton stopped at door 502 and fumbled with his keys, his hand trembling slightly. "Are you all right?" Scott asked. "I'm fine," Milton answered, taking a breath and turning the key. They stepped inside. Scott casually closed the door and quickly cast a few protective charms. On the sofa, Mr. Greaves sat with a woman in a black robe and hood. When the woman stood, she trembled, took a step forward, then hesitated. Milton stared at her, biting his lips so hard it looked painful. "You're here," Mr. Greaves said, breaking the silence. The woman pulled back her hood. Her face was haggard. She had long brown hair and brown eyes resembling Milton. In that instant, her gaze fixed on Milton alone. Her lips, pale and trembling, couldn't form words. "Father, mother," Milton whispered, his voice barely audible. "Long time no see." He tried to keep his emotions in check, his expression numb, as if unsure how to react. Then his mother rushed forward and embraced him, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry," she kept repeating, as if those were the only words she knew. Milton's eyes reddened. "You don't need to apologize," he said softly. "No," his mother sobbed, unable to speak further. Scott watched Mr. Greaves, who remained standing. Greaves gestured for Scott to step into the study. Scott followed and sat on the single sofa by the window while Mr. Greaves took the seat opposite Tolva, rubbing his temples. "I'm sorry to call you here like this," Mr. Greaves said hoarsely. "In the eyes of Milton's friends, I must seem a poor father." Scott gave an awkward, sympathetic smile. Mr. Greaves continued, "I am indeed incompetent, and because of my failures, both my wife and my child were hurt." Scott felt uncomfortable. He hadn't expected this sudden confession. Mr. Greaves recovered quickly. "I apologize. I shouldn't be telling you this. You're still a child." Scott remained silent. Mr. Greaves cleared his throat. "The reason I asked you here is that some things can only be settled in person. I originally wanted to contact Dumbledore, but he said this matter could be entrusted to you. I'm also familiar with your deeds, Scott, so I have no objection to asking you." Scott leaned forward. "If it's news about Medea, please tell me. It concerns me greatly." "Medea Slytherin has awakened." Old Mr. Greaves said it as if stating the weather. Scott nodded without surprise. "Do you know where she is now? What she's doing?" "I don't know where she is," Graves admitted, eyes dropping to the small round table between them. "But I know what she wants." He spoke slowly, the weight of it in his voice. "It's connected to an artifact in the Graves collection." Scott remembered the gossip he'd overheard. Mrs. Zabini had married old Mr. Graves for a reason. "So you should be under watch," he said. Graves gave a bitter little smile. "That's why I keep Milton's mother at my side at all times." Scott frowned. If anyone was in danger, the sensible thing would have been to send her somewhere far away, out of the country. Graves seemed to read the thought and added, "I had no choice." He told the story then, beginning before his marriage to Mrs. Zabini. From the moment he'd first met her, he had been wary. She was famous in British magic as the Black Widow, and yet something about their connection had drawn him in. He'd told himself he had nothing she'd want. He wasn't a powerful man. He'd even been slightly smug about it. That smugness evaporated when a colleague at the ministry had drunkenly recruited him into the whole Wizarding Council. Graves subdued the man, forced Veritaserum down his throat, then erased the memory of that period with a memory charm. From the man's testimony, he learned something unforgivable. Zabini was a member of the whole Wizarding Council. "At that point, I grew suspicious," Graves said. "I wanted to understand why she'd approached me." He admitted, shamefully, that he'd gone too far. People misunderstood his relationship with Zabini, Milton's mother among them, but he needed to know the motive. He discovered the truth by careful, too careful, means. "Zabini was acting on Medea Slytherin's instructions," Graves said quietly. "She courted me to acquire a specific artifact my father had hidden." Fear set in then. Graves believed there was no resisting what Medea wanted. If he tried to pull away, he feared the retaliation would not fall on him alone. Zabini, the council, even Medea could turn their reprisals on his wife and child. He couldn't gamble with that. "That was one reason I married her," he said. "The other was, I wanted power." Scott listened. Graves met his look and shrugged, not attempting to hide the truth. "I know your talents, Scott. It's pointless to lie for appearances." "You made a poor bargain," Scott said simply. Graves nodded. "I overestimated myself. The damage that's been done to Milton and his mother is something I can never undo." He went on. "The artifact Medea wanted," Graves had gathered, "could break many spells. If it gathered energy for long enough, it might be able to break any magic." The phrase made Scott's mind jump to other dangerous things, the Avalon Passage, other rare counterarts. Why not simply take it with power like Medea's? Scott asked. Graves' face tightened. My father arranged the protections. It said he set it so the artifact will self-destruct on a thought. Said? Scott echoed. Graves winced. That's everything I've been able to collect. My father never spoke of it, but rumors, pure-blood families, emerging houses, all have heard whispers about it. Scott blinked. And you never told your father about Mrs. Zabini's approach? About Medea? My father knows what has happened to the Graves, Graves said, shrugging. But he answers to no one. He's always been like that. Scott still felt something unspoken, but pressed the practical problem. If Medea couldn't get the artifact by trickery, she would find another way. An Imperius could handle a lot, but Graves was confident the old man wouldn't fall to that. His father had been cautious his whole life. Graves leaned forward then. There is one more thing you should know. The whole Wizarding Council appears calm, but they have private lines of communication. The Flu Network? Scott asked. He thought Dumbledore and Madame Bones had already taken steps to regulate those channels. Graves shook his head. Those little fireplaces still work for private talk. The Ministry can't block or monitor them unless they shut down the entire Flu Network, and they can't do that. Scott let the information sink in. Do you know Medea's next move? No, Graves said, contrite, but I'm certain their next target is my father. So if Scott wanted to meet Medea, the Graves estate was the most likely place she would appear. Scott nodded. Thank you for telling me. No, thank you. I'm the one asking for help, Scott. Graves's voice sharpened. If we don't get help, Milton and his mother will be used against my father, but I also know my father won't yield to them. Graves' words were meant to soften Scott, to tug at his sympathy. Scott thought for a moment, then offered a concrete solution. I can provide an absolutely safe place for them, he said. A refuge. I will monitor your father's location constantly. I'll need you to give me the address. Graves raised an eyebrow. Absolutely safe? Scott stood and touched the Odin's Eye pendant at his chest. A clean white flash sprang into being, and a doorway of light hovered in the air. Come with me. He stepped through. On the other side was a small, self-contained wood, an alternate dimension carved from ancient spatial magic. Graves' mouth fell open. This is an alternate realm, separate from reality, constructed by powerful ancient wizards, Scott said, guiding him. I built a house there, fully equipped, enough stores to last. It's safe. Graves' hands were still trembling when Scott showed him the villa, modest, secure, stocked with everything a non-magical woman might need. Please, let Milton's mother move in, Graves begged. Scott blinked. And what about you and Milton? Milton could stay with Scott at Hogwarts or remain with his mother in the refuge. Graves shook his head. Milton will be all right. He can be with you or at school. I will return to my father's house and face what comes. Scott didn't argue. He gestured, and the light door appeared again. Back in the study, Milton was comforting his mother. She had stopped weeping uncontrollably, but still spoke, shaken and self-reproaching. When she saw Scott and Graves, she straightened up, brushed tears away, and apologized for their first meeting being under such circumstances. Scott, thank you, she murmured repeatedly. She praised his help feeler than she could restrain. Scott replied with quiet politeness. It would not do to encourage so much gratitude. Graves explained the arrangements to Milton and his mother. She looked at him, silently accepted, and prepared to move into the villa in the Odin's Eye space, accompanied by Milton. As a Muggle, she would not be used to magical appliances, so Scott arranged for Lambo, now guarding the vault beneath the villa, to act as her personal assistant. The promise of a familiar, watchful guardian seemed to settle her. Old Mr. Graves left for his father's house to take up whatever confrontation awaited. Milton thanked Scott over and over. Scott humored him until the formalities were done. Then he left Graves and Milton at the threshold and made his way to the Ministry of Magic. I already arranged it with Madame Bones at the commendation ceremony, he told Milton as they parted. I'm going to the Department of Mysteries, the Hall of Prophecy. I'm going to retrieve the prophecy about me. Inside a dilapidated red phone booth on the street, Scott extended a finger and dialed a string of numbers. A clear, disembodied voice answered. Hello, this is the Ministry of Magic. Please state your identity and reason for visiting. Scott Trollope, he said. Before he could give a reason, the voice softened. Is that you? Yes, Mr. Trollope. The minister has arranged an appointment for you. Please accept your visitor's badge. A silver badge materialized and dropped into his hand. Please consult the front desk in the atrium. The phone booth began to descend like an elevator. Milton, uneasy, asked, Should I not have come with you? Scott raised an eyebrow. Then you go to the alternate dimension and stay with your mother for a while. Milton hesitated for 2 seconds, then nodded. Scott casually swiped open an illusory light door and let him step through. The moment the light closed, the booth stopped and Scott stepped out into the familiar Ministry of Magic atrium. Bypassing the Fountain of Magical Brethren, he walked to the front desk where a young witch wearing a perfect smile was waiting. Please follow me, Mr. Trollope, she said. Thank you. She led him into an elevator that took them down to the minister's office on the first basement level. The office door was open. Madame Bones sat alone, writing furiously. Minister, Mr. Trollope has arrived, the witch announced. Madame Bones looked up and gave him a kind smile. Good morning, Scott. Good morning, Madame Bones. Please have a seat. Scott settled across from her at the desk. Madame Bones tapped the surface, and a ripple of enchantment spread through the room. You must have guessed, she said. This is to prevent eavesdropping. Before we go to the Hall of Prophecy, I want to talk to you, Scott said. Of course. She watched him for a moment, then nodded. After 20 minutes of conversation, she tapped the desk again and rose. This is the secretary's office. This is the deputy minister's, she said, guiding him through the corridors like a tour guide as they left the office. They walked instead of taking the elevator, descending from the first basement level down to the 9th, where the Department of Mysteries was located. Under the minister's guidance, Scott passed through various departments and met countless wizards and witches. Since it was Christmas Eve and the ministry worked only half a day, many who were slacking off reacted with panicked airs at seeing the minister. Finally, they entered the Hall of Prophecy. The room was vast and dim, rows of wooden shelves reaching almost to the ceiling. Each shelf held countless glass orbs, crystal balls glowing faintly in the gloom. Any findings? Madame Bones asked. Scott lowered his voice. I can sense who harbors ill will toward me, but I can't be certain that the person is a member of the whole Wizarding Council. The prophecy hasn't been revealed yet. We're not enemies with the Council. It's more likely the wizard hostile to me is connected to a Death Eater. Madame Bones nodded. The investigation will be my headache. All you need to do is give me the list. Scott pulled a parchment from his deformed lizard skin bag, summoned a string of names with a flick of magic, and handed the parchment to her. Madame Bones smiled as she took it. Very good. You may retrieve your prophecy crystal ball. Following a sudden guidance he couldn't explain, Scott found the right orb. He picked it up and tucked it into the lizard skin pouch before it could begin to glow. But Madame Bones asked to hear the prophecy for herself. Although Dumbledore has already informed me, she said, this is important. I hope you understand. They returned to the minister's office. Madame Bones tapped the desk again, and Scott took the crystal ball out. It emitted a hazy light in his hand, and Professor Trelawney's strange, sing-song voice echoed. The scroll of history opens. The revived witch stirs up a storm, distorting the 1,000-mile eye's vision. The sleeping Great One will awaken, seizing the eternal king's legacy. He seeks to devour the non-existent, to escape the shackles of fate. He will ultimately fail, defeated by the hand of the non-existent. The prophecy's echoes faded, and the crystal ball stilled. Madame Bones drew a long breath. I understand. We cannot relax yet. Her face hardened with resolve. You must not face this alone, Scott. It's far too dangerous. I want you to cooperate with the ministry. Scott nodded and handed her a small enchanted phone. If I find anything, I'll notify you. After apparating away from the ministry, he went straight to Milton's apartment. There, waiting in the dim living room, stood a wizard with his face hidden beneath a hood. The moment Scott appeared, the figure froze. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other. Then the hooded wizard spoke his name in a muffled voice. Scott Trollope. The voice was disguised. His magical signature felt unfamiliar. Scott didn't ask who he was. He didn't expect an honest answer. You've come at an inconvenient time, he said coldly. Milton and his mother are already somewhere absolutely safe. Absolutely safe? Hogwarts? No, that won't do. It must be your alternate dimension magic, the same kind that once trapped Lord Voldemort and the Death Eaters. The hooded voice was dry. Scott let out a short laugh. Your first guess is Hogwarts? You must be British. There are many wizards in Britain, the other said, unconcerned. Scott didn't bother to draw his wand. He raised his hand and shot a thin red beam from his fingertip that struck the man's chest with a buzzing sound. The noise was wrong, unnatural. Scott's eyes narrowed. You're a puppet, he said with certainty. You know quite a bit, the hooded figure chuckled twice. I thought this was Medea's exclusive magic. Miss Slytherin is always generous, Scott replied. The hooded figure's laughter cut off as his body crumpled backward. With the sound of shattering porcelain, he fell apart into a heap of fragments, pieces of a hollow doll scattering across the floor. 548. The kidnapped Milton. Humph. Scott stepped forward, kicked aside the black robe, and looked down at the scatter of white porcelain shards on the floor. After a moment, he took out his magic mirror and contacted Mr. Greaves. Everything normal on your end? He asked. A mouse just ran into Milton's apartment. Are you all right? Mr. Greaves answered, anxious. We're fine. Milton is with his mother in the alternate space. Scott described what had just happened. In short, the intruder didn't come in person. It was just a ceramic doll. That's one of Miss Slytherin's confidants, Mr. Greaves said. Only a few people have been taught to possess dolls like that. Do you know who they are? Sorry, I learned this by observing Zabini. I don't know their identities. What about those ceramic people Medea raised during the Azkaban battle? They've been hiding ever since, Mr. Greaves said. They haven't shown themselves again. Scott acknowledged that. He told Mr. Greaves to notify him immediately if anything happened, then ended the call. He gathered the porcelain shards, stepped into the Odin's Eye space, and inside the villa avoided Milton's mother to find Milton himself. Thank you, Scott, Milton said, looking grateful. If it weren't for you. Scott had heard enough gratitude for one day and cut him off, outlining the plan. I'm going to Spain for Christmas. Do you want to stay here with your mother or go to Hogwarts? Milton thought it over and chose to stay in the alternate space. Once it was settled, Scott left the Odin's Eye and apparated home. Unlike the last time, when his long-distance apparition had almost gone wrong, his control over space magic had improved, and the ride caused no discomfort. He spent a pleasant Christmas with his family, telling only his father, Michael, about the goings-on in the magical world. With Scott's strength increasing and his bargaining chips growing, Michael felt more at ease. Scott also considered moving his family into the Odin's Eye for safety. He was extremely careful whenever he visited Spain, blocking his name, constantly using magical perception to check for trackers, but he knew anything could go wrong. He remembered the time someone had managed to get close to the country manor while following a marauder's map. It may have been paranoia, but when it came to family, he could be overly cautious. He suggested the idea to his father, but Michael refused. Your mother and I could hide, but what about your uncle and aunt and their kids? They have lives and careers. So Scott found another solution. Pouring nearly the full extent of his current alchemy skill and using some precious materials, he spent several days creating 2 magical devices a Muggle could use. He presented the finished items, a pile of accessories and a key, to his father. This ring lets you channel magic briefly, he explained, holding out a ring inset with a sapphire. This gem contains magic, Scott said, pointing to the stone. Michael put the ring on with interest. How do I use it? One more step. Scott had Michael take the ring off, then used some of his own blood to engrave runes on its surface. This should do it. Let me try, Michael said. Scott stopped him. You don't have magic. I used our blood relation to bind it so you can forcibly activate the stone's magic. So it's uncontrolled? Michael asked. It's not quite single use, Scott said. I don't know exactly how many times it can be used. It's likely to be damaged if pushed too far. He explained the ring's 3 functions. First, it creates a magical barrier that repels people nearby and deflects magical attacks, protecting whoever's inside. Scott didn't mention that he'd used space magic, so the barrier could temporarily resist even a killing curse. another reason the ring was prone to damage. Second, it teleports anyone wearing the matching accessories into the barrier. He unfurled the pile of accessories, brooches, cufflinks, necklaces, bracelets, earrings, hairpins, each set with a gem that held magic. The accessories couldn't be activated by their wearers. They would activate only when Michael used the ring. Third, there's this key. Scott produced a long copper key. When activated, it teleports everyone inside the barrier directly into the Odin's Eye space. I understand. Michael nodded and looked at the dark circles under Scott's eyes. He patted his son's shoulder. Get some rest. I'll handle the rest. Scott smiled and added, one of these accessories is special. If its owner encounters danger, the ring will activate automatically. For your mother? Michael guessed, picking out a necklace that would suit Amelia. You're right. If an enemy comes, they'll have to get through her and me before reaching your uncle and aunt. With the arrangements complete, Scott felt some relief and returned to Britain a day early. Nothing had happened on Mr. Greaves's side in those days, but Scott hadn't relied solely on his reports. He'd placed surveillance eyes in Mr. Greaves's house through his contact, and as his alchemy improved, these devices not only watched, but automatically alerted him through remote contact with the magic mirror. When Scott returned to Milton's apartment, he narrowed his eyes. Someone had been there again. Though he detected no lingering magical traces, some objects had been moved. Still not giving up? He muttered. He couldn't figure out the other party's aim. There'd been no activity from Mr. Greaves's end, yet they kept coming to this apartment. Scott opened a light door into the Odin's Eye and brought Milton out. Your grandfather might be a tricky character, Scott said. Otherwise, why would they try to take you hostage? Milton shrugged. I don't know him at all. You didn't say your grandfather had other children besides your father. My mother told me our eldest uncle's family disappeared a long time ago, Milton said. Grandfather didn't seem worried. Mother thinks they went abroad to hide. I see. Scott stood. Let's go for a walk. You mean? If someone is watching, let them know you've reappeared, Scott explained. If they show themselves, we'll find them. If they don't, we'll hunt them down. Milton agreed and brought his wand and a Scottish bagpipe. You can use musical magic with instruments other than the cello now? Milton nodded. Not as effectively, but yes. They left the apartment and walked the block. Scott's eyes flicked to a bank building across the street. Target spotted, he said. Let's go. He ran first, cutting through a back alley and apparating amid the screech of a stray cat. When he reached the bank roof, he saw a figure in green robes apparating away. Milton didn't follow. A diversion, Scott thought, and started to return to the alley when magic surged from the concrete beneath his feet. The other side had set up an anti-apparition ward. Tsk! He transformed into a peregrine falcon and dove toward the street, but the back alley they'd used earlier, full of trash cans and stray cats, seemed to have been erased, leaving no trace. In animagus form, Scott couldn't use magical perception. He landed in an empty alley, shifted back to human form, and used magical sight to find the concealed passage. He caught a clue, ran, and charged at what looked like a solid wall. His vision blurred, and he was back in the trash-filled alley. There, the figure in green robes waited, wand pressed against Milton's temple. You're late, Trollop, the figure said, hood pulled low, revealing only the lower half of his face. So it's you again, Scott said, studying him. This time, your true body. That's right, the man laughed confidently. Don't move, Trollop, or I can't promise I won't hurt your friend. I'm sorry, Scott. The man holding Milton sneered. The captured boy looked utterly dejected. The hooded man barked an order. Now, throw away your wand. Scott smiled. Do you think a wand is essential for me? Don't move, not a finger, the man hissed. If you so much as twitch, I'll kill him. You won't kill him, Scott said calmly. He's still useful to you. Then I'll ruin his hands, the kidnapper replied, the words like a blade. Make sure this musical genius can never play again. Milton's eyes widened and tears welled, but he bit them back. Scott's face turned cold. If you lay a hand on him, I promise you won't leave here alive. Don't be excited, the kidnapper chuckled. I'm here to deliver a message from the esteemed Miss Slytherin. Speak, Scott said, fixed on him. She's very interested in the prophecy orb you took from the ministry a few days ago. Scott's face showed the shock he felt, but he kept his voice steady. "Tell Medea not to forget Lord Voldemort and the Death Eater's fate," he said. "Shut up." The man blew up. "How dare you compare a failure like Voldemort to the esteemed Miss Slytherin?" "In my opinion," Scott shot back, anger flaring, "there's no difference between them. Medea was once defeated by Voldemort." "Are you trying to provoke me?" The kidnapper sneered, but he didn't fall for it. He kept his right hand steady on his wand and his left hand tight on Milton's shoulder. "Message delivered. Goodbye, Trollope." With a crack, he apparated away, taking Milton with him. "Milton?" Scott shouted. He clenched his fists and looked down, the corners of his mouth lifting into a tiny smile no one could see. He quickly reshaped his expression into panic, then apparated away himself. In an eye blink, he was on the edge of the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts. He drew a light door and watched Milton step out. "Did it work?" Milton asked, expectant. Scott nodded. "He's already taken the other Milton, his fake." Milton stared, disbelief on his face. "I don't know what to say. No one has ever transfigured a living human before." "I didn't transfigure anyone," Scott said. "I dressed an automaton in a skin identical to yours. Inside is an automatically transforming alchemical doll. He owed special thanks to Mr. Jeffrey for the alchemical knowledge and materials that made it possible." Scott tapped the magic mirror. "We can see and hear what the fake Milton sees." The magic mirror displayed an image almost immediately. Scott looked at the scene on the glass with a strange familiarity he couldn't place. 549, the 10th courtroom. In the image shown by the magic mirror, green-robed figures were escorting Milton down a dim, windowless corridor. It looked underground. Scott stared until the view revealed two large black metal doors wrapped in chains. "The Ministry of Magic?" Milton blurted. Scott, stunned, answered before he could stop himself. "This is the 10th underground level of the Ministry, the 10th trial chamber." Milton was speechless. Scott swept his finger across the mirror, splitting the image, and contacted Madame Bones directly. "Hello, Scott." She appeared in the other half of the mirror. "Has something happened?" Scott told her everything at once. As he spoke, in the mirrored image, the chains around the doors began to shift, and the doors opened. The green-robed figures marched their hostage into the 10th trial chamber. Madame Bones listened, her face growing grave. "I understand." She stood and left her office, then paused after a few steps. "There are many hidden members of the whole Wizarding Council inside the Ministry," she said. "If I act now, they'll be alerted." Scott guessed, "So your purge of the Ministry hasn't gone smoothly." "No." Madame Bones sounded helpless. "The Ministry must base arrests on evidence. Even if we suspect someone belongs to the whole Wizarding Council, we can't arrest them without proof of a crime." "Then perhaps the whole Wizarding Council should be declared an illegal organization," Scott suggested. "That's not my decision alone." She hesitated. "How are things there now?" "They've taken the 10th trial chamber," Scott replied. "There are 5 of them, Medea and 4 others. They didn't apparate in. One of them brought a small fireplace, enlarged it, and came through the flue network." "Respected Miss Slytherin," the green-robed who had the hostage bowed to Medea. "I have captured Milton Graves." "Well done, Williamson." Medea's face remained hidden behind a black veil, only her fair chin and bright lips were visible. "I heard Scott has always been with this boy." "Yes." The captor drew back his hood, revealing a face Scott recognized. "Scott Trollope, a famous name, but nothing remarkable." He sneered, dismissing Scott as an empty celebrity. "Williamson," Scott said, remembering. "You were an Auror, weren't you? You once visited the Trollopes in Hastings with Kingsley." Williamson's magic signature had changed since that visit. His manner now felt different. Madame Bones said quietly, "I've alerted Rufus Scrimgeour at the Auror office." "Please let me help too," Scott offered. "All right," Madame Bones nodded. "I'll transfer the monitoring feed to your magic phone." Scott set to work and asked Milton, "Are you coming with me or going back to Hogwarts alone? Please let me come." Milton pleaded, "I can stay in the alternate space." Scott nodded and opened a shimmering portal. Milton stepped through. Back in the 10th trial chamber, Medea raised a hand to cut off Williamson's taunts and looked at Milton, tied to the dock and trembling with suspicion. "Tell me exactly how you captured him, Williamson." Scott knew he had to act fast. If Medea examined Milton too closely, the deception would be revealed. He could not apparate directly into the chamber, only into the ministry foyer, but spatial magic was his strength. He activated a black feather from his pocket, slipped through space, and materialized silently in the corridor outside the 10th trial chamber. He stooped and picked up another identical feather left intentionally by Milton. He drew his wand, and a quiet charm blended him into the surroundings. Even nearby sounds seemed to dim. He followed the image on the magic mirror in his hand as events unfolded inside. After Williamson finished his account, Medea pursed her lips, one of the green-robed with her scolded Williamson. "Scott Trollope did it on purpose. He let you capture Milton." "Quick," another urged. "Search him. This boy might be holding something." Scott had already reached the chamber door and pressed his wand to it. White runes bloomed across the metal in a branching pattern. "No need," Medea said, approaching Milton. She removed a black lace glove and pinched his face between two fingers. "Fake." "I've been found out," the thing bound to the dock said, and a grin split its face unnaturally wide, lips stretching toward the ears. Everyone but Medea flinched. "I am Milton Graves." The voice shifted, its tone became mechanical. Color began to drain from the captive, hair and skin turning to a reflective bright silver. "An alchemical puppet?" Medea laughed. "Interesting. Truly, Scott, he keeps improving." The silver body ran like mercury from the dock to the floor, reshaping into a humanoid figure that looked like a department store mannequin. Williamson stared, stunned. "Let's go, Miss Slytherin." Another green-robed enlarged the palm-sized fireplace and urged Medea forward. "We might already be surrounded." "We can't leave," Medea replied calmly. "If I'm not mistaken, Scott has turned this place into an alternate dimension." "What? How is that possible?" One of them rushed to jump into the fireplace and found they could not leave. Their attempt failed. "It's all right," a female voice said, the one who had remained silent until now. "Miss Slytherin did not come in her true form." "But," someone began. "No but," the woman snapped. "We haven't committed serious crimes. It doesn't matter if we get caught." Silence fell. Medea spoke into the air. "Scott, I know you can hear me. Are you afraid to meet me?" "Good afternoon, Medea." Scott's figure materialized next to the silver puppet. "Long time no see." "You," Williamson lunged, furious. "You dared to trick me." Scott ignored him and addressed Medea. "The ministry chose a dramatic venue." Medea's mouth curved. "It is appropriate, isn't it?" "Respected Miss Slytherin." Williamson tried again. "Allow me to fight for you. I'll subdue Scott Trollope." Scott still did not look at him. "Is that the subordinate you rely on? It makes me question your judgment." "Damn it," Williamson snarled and attacked. He didn't cast a complex spell, just a flick of his wand, and a crimson beam shot through Scott's body. Scott, unthreatened, nodded as if evaluating. "A beautiful silent charm. Not subtle, but he has talent for charms." "Illusion?" Williamson faltered as the stern woman cut in. "Stand down, Williamson." He lowered his head and stepped back. "Williamson is indeed very talented," the woman said approvingly. Medea's smile never wavered. "But he still can't compare to you, Scott." "I think very few people can," Scott said. "That's true," Medea agreed. "Is Milton's grandfather that tricky? Did you have to kidnap Milton because of him?" Medea answered plainly. "That gentleman spent his life turning his house into an unbreakable, magical fortress. He never leaves it." "Was it protected with the Fidelius charm?" Scott asked. "More than that." Medea shook her head. "Like I said, he spent his life building it." "You couldn't get in?" Scott guessed aloud. He thought Medea might have used a disposable philosopher's stone. She shrugged. "If there was a way without paying a price, I'd choose it." Outside the 10th trial chamber, Scott's true body stood with an Aura Strike team led by Rufus Scrimgeour, watching the live feed on the magic mirror. Footsteps echoed as Madame Bones and Dumbledore approached from down the corridor. "Oh, Scott, have you caught them?" Madame Bones asked. "They didn't come in their true forms." Scott shook his head. "There is a woman possessing a puppet as well." Back inside, Scott and Medea continued their exchange. "I remember you once said that if I live, you can get what you want," Scott said. "Have you gotten it?" "I'm very satisfied with the changes you've brought," Medea replied. Her tone was almost appreciative, "including making it impossible for you to retrieve Lord Voldemort's soul?" "That is nothing," she said. "Since I chose to let you change the world, I accept the changes you bring." "Good," Scott sighed theatrically. Has there been enough change? Medea laughed. You really are perceptive. Is it because of the prophecy? What prophecy? Scott feigned ignorance. Think what you like. Medea's eyes glittered behind the veil. If you hadn't taken the prophecy orb, I wouldn't have expected a real prophecy to appear. I underestimated your divination, Professor. I knew taking the prophecy orb would arouse suspicion, Scott said, but I still took it. So what did you learn from it? What's in the prophecy? Medea prodded. Nothing, Scott said, sheepish. Professor Trelawney said I'd live a loveless life and die alone. It's embarrassing. I didn't want people to know. Is that so? Medea didn't press. I don't need you to tell me. As long as I believe you learned something, that's enough. If you want to think that, there's nothing I can do. Scott turned the question back on her. I want to learn a truth from you as well. Medea's tone brightened. I look forward to your actions, Scott. I want to see how people who learn their fate will change everything. Her face stiffened, and she said, Well then, see you next time. You're leaving already? Scott asked. Aren't you going to deal with these people? They haven't committed serious crimes, have they? Medea's last words whispered into the chamber. Then she went utterly still, her features hardening into a glazed ceramic rigidity. The decisive woman, more formidable than Medea, did not hesitate. She dropped to the ground and smashed the ceramic puppet into dust. What about you all? Scott demanded of the remaining green-robed figures. At his words, the silver puppet moved. Its arms extended like ropes and bound the four others. The silver figure wrapped and cinched them tightly, stripping wands from their hands. Williamson and the others did not resist. The puppet had them trussed and helpless in moments. 550. Helena's guess, Nidhogg. Outside the 10th trial chamber, Scott burst through the pocket dimension that had enclosed it. The Auror Strike team surged in and formally arrested the four subdued figures. Scott took the chance to sheath the silver puppet and let his phantom clone evaporate. By then, the other three had their hoods pulled back. Apart from Williamson, whose face was already known, Scott didn't recognize any of them. Madam Bones instructed Scrimger, detain them in the dungeons and assign reliable guards. Scrimger nodded and sent the strike team to escort the prisoners away. As he passed Madam Bones, a thin-faced wizard smiled and said, We only made a few small mistakes. No need to overreact. I trust the minister will handle this impartially. The three unfamiliar wizards didn't seem bothered by their arrest. They carried themselves as if they had nothing to fear. Only the youngest, Williamson, looked furious, glaring at Scott with fierce eyes. Watching them led away, Scott smiled. They're arrogant. They haven't committed a major crime, Madam Bones said calmly, and they are not isolated. If we moved to punish them severely, we would face a lot of resistance. That's true, Scott admitted. Still, it's good they've been exposed. We can keep an eye on them now. These four hadn't been involved in previous whole Wizarding Council activities. Madam Bones, who had been present at the Azkaban battle, had catalogued the council members who had appeared there. This group hadn't made moves until now. I never expected the ministry to become their meeting place, she frowned. We'll need to tighten security at the ministry. Madam Bones looked troubled. Though she was now Minister of Magic, only those who had always stood with her would fully obey her directives. Scott had little interest in politics, and Dumbledore said little. After exchanging a few remarks with Madam Bones, Scott and Dumbledore left the ministry and returned to Hogwarts. You can take a breather, Dumbledore told Scott. I will stay in touch with old Mr. Graves. Dumbledore continued handling affairs even with Lord Voldemort gone, which reassured Scott. After thanking Dumbledore, Scott left the headmaster's office and returned to his dormitory, where he released Milton from the Odin's Eye space. I'm sorry, Scott told Milton. Medea was far too cautious. I couldn't find where she's currently hiding, and I failed to capture her. He recounted the whole episode. Milton thanked him repeatedly and tried to comfort him not to be too disappointed. Scott didn't feel crushed. He hadn't expected to succeed on his first try, but he was troubled by something Medea had said when she left. Perhaps she isn't entirely on her father's side? Helena's guess, spoken later, sat with him. Back in Helena's study, the two of them were talking in front of the Ravenclaw portrait. Back then, Medea didn't marry Gaunt of her own free will, Helena added. Scott tried to sort out the logic. Slytherin himself probably didn't even know I existed. After all, I am the non-existent one, unseen by the thousand-mile eyes and unrecorded in the scroll of history. Medea's existence was Slytherin's contingency against fate, Scott said. He arranged for her to revive in the present, to disturb the future he'd observed with the thousand-mile eyes, to throw the predetermined outcomes into disarray. Presumably the scroll of history must be in Medea's possession, Helena supplied. After she revived, she found me, the non-existent one, Scott continued. My existence makes the future Slytherin observed uncertain, which would help Medea complete whatever task Slytherin set. That's why she tried to gain your favor and willingly gave you gifts, Helena said. She always wanted Slytherin to see her differently. Helena's eyes lit up with a new theory. Or, she wants to take Slytherin's achievements for herself. Even she widened her eyes as she spoke, surprised by her own thought, but she became convinced. That explains a lot. She spoke quickly, animated. She wanted the magic item from Graves because she needed it to break magical barriers and get into Avalon, or to undo Slytherin's arrangements inside Avalon. She wasn't overly worried about Voldemort's soul disappearing because she had a better prize. She was calm when you learned the truth through prophecy. She wanted you to weaken Slytherin's power first, ideally so that both you and Slytherin suffered, and then she could seize the greatest benefit. Both Scott and the Ravenclaw portrait looked at her in surprise. It wasn't so much the content as the source, this sweet, innocent Helena making such dark, far-reaching conjectures. Helena flushed a little under their gaze. I only know this because I used to be friends with Medea. Of course, it's only a wild guess. I don't think your guess is impossible, Scott said. I remember Medea once saying she loved her father, but loved him so much that she hated him more. Ravenclaw told Scott, if that's true, you have far more room to maneuver. Scott nodded. You're right. If Medea isn't completely obedient to her father, then I have options. Ravenclaw smiled. Since this possibility exists, we should plan ahead. I'll need your help consulting more, Scott said. They discussed plans for a while. After leaving Helena's study, Scott returned to his dormitory and contacted old Mr. Graves with Milton beside him. Milton had already told his grandfather what had happened, and old Mr. Graves began by thanking Scott repeatedly. Scott offered polite replies and then got to the point. Is your father willing to give up that magic item? He asked. Old Mr. Graves on the other end turned his head with a troubled expression. Impossible. A cold, hard voice answered as he appeared in the communication mirror. He wasn't kindly or warm, he was rigid, even harsh. Don't get any ideas, boy. That item belongs to Graves. It's the very foundation of Graves's existence. I will not give it up. You misunderstand, sir, Scott said patiently. I'm not asking for the item. I'm suggesting that for safety, it might be better to hand it over rather than let Medea take it by force. The family's safety matters more than an artifact. Old Mr. Graves snorted. This is a Graves matter. Milton and his grandfather grew tense. Father, Milton began. Old Mr. Graves tried to make his son understand. What Scott says isn't unreasonable. If we can't resist, surrendering it might protect the family. Shut up, old Mr. Graves snapped. His stance was unbending. I don't have a weak son like you. If you're scared, you can leave. Go hide somewhere far away. Milton's face fell. Is our family's life not more important than a magic item? I'm not asking you to die, old Mr. Graves shot back. I told you, you can leave. Why are you saying this now? Milton asked, voice small. Old Mr. Graves answered with bitter anger. When you secretly sent my brother and his family away, you didn't think of me and Milton. This is trouble you brought on yourself. You deserve to bear it. He turned away and ended the conversation. I'm sorry. Scott felt awkward at having provoked the quarrel and quickly apologized to old Mr. Graves. It's not your fault. Old Mr. Graves looked exhausted. I already tried to persuade my father before this, but he would rather die with that artifact than give it up. Scott offered a few words of comfort and then reminded them, if anything happens, please let me know. Dumbledore is also watching. If Medea tries to take it by force, we will come to stop her. Thank you, Milton said after the call ended. Scott exhaled. Milton thanked him again, and Scott raised a hand to stop him. My motive isn't only concern for your family's safety. From another perspective, Medea obtaining the item might actually help me. He explained how letting Medea get the artifact could help test Helena's theory and reveal Medea's true intentions. If Medea reached Avalon first, that might not be disastrous for Scott. He'd already secured cooperation with the Druid tribe guarding Avalon and could monitor events there. He might even attempt to infiltrate Medea's side covertly. Milton worriedly asked, "What if she uses the item against you?" Scott wasn't worried. That item needs to accumulate power for a long time to deliver a single blow strong enough to break any magic. It may be a super attack, but it's only a single strike. As long as I'm prepared, it's manageable. "That's unfortunate," Milton said. "My grandfather won't give it up. I'm sorry, Scott. I couldn't help." "It's all right," Scott said. "I can verify the theory other ways." They dropped the subject. The group had returned to Hogwarts a day early. The rest of the students arrived the next evening. Before dinner, everyone noticed Professor Snape at the staff table and murmured. "What's going on?" someone asked. "Why is Snape back?" Eddie complained, putting on a pained expression. Roger scanned the table. "Professor Slughorn is still here. I don't see Professor Moody." Scott looked up. "It seems Snape is taking over Defense Against the Dark Arts." "Oh." Roger looked displeased. He finally got his wish. Eddie stroked his chin. "Snape and Slughorn, who will be the head of Slytherin now?" The whole Great Hall buzzed until Dumbledore stood. "Professor Moody has accepted the Ministry's invitation to work there full-time and has resigned from his professorship," he announced. "Let us welcome Professor Snape back to Hogwarts as our Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher." He led the polite applause. Snape was not widely beloved, so the clapping from the other houses was sparse. Slytherin's applause, however, was enthusiastic. Snape barely reacted. He gave a slight nod, his expression flat. "Furthermore," Dumbledore continued, "Professor Slughorn wishes to devote more energy to his potions classes, so the headship of Slytherin will be taken up by Professor Snape." Professor Slughorn led the applause this time. Snape displayed a rare bit of civility, raising his wine glass in a brief salute to Slughorn. "Oh, now Snape has another reason to favor Slytherin," Eddie grumbled. Scott shrugged. "Even if he weren't head, he'd still favor Slytherin." Roger smiled. "It doesn't matter. We graduate in half a year." "Yes," Milton's voice held a wistful edge. "This is our last semester at Hogwarts." For 2 months after Christmas, Scott lived a peaceful life. The confirmed members of the full Wizarding Council behaved themselves. Medea did not force her way into the Graves house to seize the artifact. The Druids were still not ready to open the passage. Nothing happened. Scott had kept a close watch at first, but soon he devoted himself to study and research. He never stopped improving his magical skills. In Transfiguration, his strongest field, he had reached a point where he could largely alter matter at will. To progress further in his special Transfiguration required concurrent advances in charm and alchemy. In alchemy, he had also made significant gains. Practically, there was little Ravenclaw could teach him. What he needed now was long-term practical research. For charm, he focused on the 2 high-order magics inherited from the old Asgard school. Whether the spatial supercharm, Yggdrasil, or the offensive supercharm, Gungnir. Each represented an entire system of knowledge developed by ancient wizards. If Scott kept digging into them, the benefits would be enormous, perhaps enough to make him a one-trick marvel who could handle everything. "This used up too many materials," he muttered in the alchemy workshop in the Room of Requirement as he returned the transformed, unrecognizable, summoned beast to the Odin's Eye space. "Fortunately, I managed to get Asgard's collections." Helena, watching from the side, smiled softly. "No wizard in the modern world is as extravagant as you." Scott grinned, but it was worth it. It was insurance for his life. He straightened and addressed the Ravenclaw portrait in the frame on the wall. "Mentor, I'm ready." Ravenclaw replied, "You truly can't increase your strength much more in a short time." Helena asked curiously, "So if Scott had to face Salazar Slytherin now?" Ravenclaw's tone wasn't optimistic. "If Salazar is at his peak or has grown stronger, Scott's chances in a straight fight aren't great." "How could that be?" Helena sounded incredulous. "I thought he'd prepared everything." "He has prepared well," Ravenclaw said, "but the chances aren't zero." "Don't worry," Scott said with confidence. "I don't have to face Salazar head-on." "Exactly," Ravenclaw smiled slightly. If I were Salazar's enemy, even if I couldn't match him in raw power, I could still make myself unbeatable. Helena looked at the painting. So strategy matters most. Of course, Ravenclaw said, but Salazar isn't lacking in cunning either. Who isn't? Ravenclaw's tone was calm. Still, I know Salazar well enough. Even if he changed after leaving Hogwarts, his character flaws wouldn't vanish. That's Scott's advantage. After expending nearly half his gathered materials to upgrade the summoned beast, Scott's studies settled into a steady rhythm. Further breakthroughs would take time, so he relaxed into orderly study and life. Babel Tower, the organization he'd founded, also developed steadily. Its members were no longer the few initial students. More were joining. But Babel Tower was still building strength, and the goal of reshaping the world remained distant. As Scott's research into spatial magic deepened, he realized the difficulty of that goal even more clearly. To advance, he didn't hoard knowledge. He shared the Yggdrasil data with every member who'd signed a confidentiality agreement. Unfortunately, spatial supermagic was hard. Even mastering the initial rune was a huge hurdle for the others, and not everyone wanted such academic, research-style training. So far, apart from Scott, progress among the members was negligible. He wasn't bothered. He'd already decided that after overcoming Salazar's Slytherin, he'd travel and find more like-minded people. One day in March, Scott's magic mirror flashed a warning, and he received a message from Mr. Greaves. "They're here." It came in the afternoon while Scott sat in defense against the dark arts. Looking at Snape teaching, Scott stood. Before Snape could launch into his usual sarcastic retort, Scott said, "Excuse me, Professor, I have an urgent matter." "Scott!" Milton, sitting beside him, grabbed his arm as if sensing danger. In a blink, they vanished from the classroom. When their vision cleared, Mr. Greaves stood before them, anxious, wand in one hand and a black feather in the other. "What's the situation?" Milton demanded. "They've surrounded the house," Mr. Greaves said. "They haven't attacked yet." Scott glanced around and realized they were on the house's second floor. He moved to a window and looked down. As Mr. Greaves had said, a group had encircled the two-story hilltop house. They wore green robes and hoods that hid their faces. Strangely, they just stood there, motionless. "I've checked from every window," Mr. Greaves said. "There are 20 wizards in total. Miss Slytherin isn't among them." "Have you notified Dumbledore and the Ministry?" Scott asked. "I only notified you and Dumbledore," Mr. Greaves replied. "Then Dumbledore will alert Madame Bones," Scott said. "Where's your father?" Milton asked. "He's downstairs," Mr. Greaves said wryly. "He's dismissive of my caution." "Is he confident in the safe house he built?" Milton asked. "Who knows?" Mr. Greaves said, helpless. "He's my father, but I've never understood him." Scott said, "Since I'm a guest, I should greet the host. Come with me." They went downstairs. Old Mr. Graves sat on the sofa in the foyer, facing the front door, neatly dressed and stern, but calm. "Father," Mr. Greaves called. Old Mr. Graves didn't turn. "Grandfather," Milton said respectfully, and the old man finally looked up. "Why are you back?" he asked, regarding Milton as if he were a stranger. He ignored Scott completely. "This is my friend Scott. Father invited him, so I returned with him," Milton stammered, clearly intimidated. Old Mr. Graves appraised Scott. "Hello, Mr. Graves," Scott said politely, despite the chilly reception. "I told you all long ago, you can leave," old Mr. Graves said, turning his gaze back to the closed main door. "I don't need anyone's help. No matter what they intend, breaking into a wizard's home by force is illegal," Scott said. "The Ministry knows about this, and they won't ignore it." Old Mr. Graves snorted. "The Ministry has too many things to manage. When do they ever get around to everything?" An explosion sounded outside. "They've started attacking!" Mr. Greaves cried and ran to the window. Scott and Milton followed. Outside in the yard, a green-robed figure launched a blasting charm at the gate, but the gate was unscathed. Mr. Greaves looked at his father in surprise. Old Mr. Graves remained seated, unmoved. Boom, boom, boom. More blasts struck the gate and the low wall, but nothing fell. Scott squinted. On closer inspection, every brick and board of the gate and wall was covered with traces of ancient runes. Old Mr. Graves's rune work wasn't particularly elegant, rudimentary even, but he'd covered every inconspicuous brick and plank with layer upon layer of runes, countless markings. Scott respected the old man's persistence and meticulousness. "We've got Dumbledore and his team," Milton said. Scott and Mr. Greaves saw them arrive at the gate, Dumbledore, and a team of Aurors led by Mad-Eye Moody. When the Aurors appeared, the green-robed attackers ceased. "Let's go out," Mr. Greaves said, glancing at his father. Old Mr. Graves let his eyelids droop and gave no reply. Mr. Greaves took that as tacit approval, opened the main door, and stepped into the yard. "I'm sorry." A charming female voice floated across the yard. A woman with her back to them and hood down stood before Dumbledore and the Aurors. She turned, and they recognized her. "It's Zabini," someone whispered. Mr. Greaves's face went dark. "Oh, you finally show your face, Charles Greaves." Mrs. Zabini looked at Mr. Greaves, then to Dumbledore and the Aurors. "I believe neither the Aurors nor the headmaster have the right to interfere in a family dispute." Dumbledore remained silent. Moody, however, wasn't willing to be placated. "What family dispute? This is old Mr. Graves's home, not yours." "But my husband is hiding here and won't come home or see me," Mrs. Zabini said in a plaintive tone. "I brought friends just to make him appear. What's wrong with that?" Moody's magical eye spun as he surveyed everyone. "You attacked old Mr. Graves's house. He has the right to seek help from the Aurors." "You're right, Mr. Moody," Mrs. Zabini laughed lightly. "I was inconsiderate. I was too angry. I will apologize to Father properly later." Scott couldn't see her face clearly, but several young Aurors behind Moody were blushing, and only Nymphadora Tonks rolled her eyes. "Don't make up excuses, Zabini," she muttered. Mr. Greaves stepped forward. "We all know what you want." "What do you think I want, Charles?" Mrs. Zabini turned to him with eyes soft as water. "I am but a poor woman desperate to win back her husband. You—" Mr. Greaves took a step back, his face twisted. "It's useless arguing with her, Zabini," Moody said, impatient. "Regardless of your aim, you attacked old Mr. Graves's home. Everyone involved must go to the ministry." Mrs. Zabini smiled as if cooperating. "Of course I'll go to the ministry to explain and to compensate Father for any losses. But my friends were only here to help. They don't need to go, do they?" "There's no negotiation," Moody said. "Father!" Mrs. Zabini cried suddenly. "This is a private Graves family matter. Are you sure the ministry should intervene? I am part of the Graves family." Scott watched in surprise as old Mr. Graves rose and walked out of the house. He addressed Moody with a stern face. "I'm sorry, Moody. I did not ask for the Auror's help." Hearing old Mr. Graves' words, Mrs. Zabini immediately turned a smile on Moody. "Since Father has already said so, Aurors shouldn't interfere in other people's family disputes, Mr. Moody." Moody's brow tightened. He stared at her with his magical eye but said nothing. Inside the courtyard gate, Charles Greaves looked at his father in confusion. "Father?" Old Mr. Graves ignored him and addressed Mrs. Zabini. "Let this be for now. Don't involve this old man in your marital affairs." "All right, Father," Mrs. Zabini purred, still smiling. "You and your friends can leave." She didn't move. The other green robbers didn't move or speak either. "No, Father." Mrs. Zabini's red lips curved up. "I came to take Charles home." Her eyes went straight to Greaves. "Dear, let's go." "You." Greaves' expression soured. "What about me?" Mrs. Zabini put on a puzzled, wounded look. Greaves took 2 deep breaths. "Stop pretending, Zabini. I won't go with you." "Why?" Her eyes glistened, theatrically soft. "Are you going to abandon me?" Greaves looked away, furious. "In any case, your objective will not be achieved." "Are you sure, Charles? Are you sure you want to leave me?" He tried to answer, but she pretended not to hear, continuing her performance until he gave up and fell silent. Scott watched, unsure what to say. Milton, standing next to him, looked even more uncomfortable. Dumbledore and Moody, outside the gate, were equally embarrassed and quiet. "Humph, old mister," Graves snorted, shattering the awkwardness. "Don't argue your affairs in front of this old man." He glared at Greaves. "And you, get out of here right now." Then he turned and walked back into the house, slamming the door shut. "Charles, Father has said so. He won't take you in anymore. You should go," Mrs. Zabini said softly. "No matter how you view our marriage, we should handle private matters privately. Don't you agree?" Greaves ignored her. He lowered his head and gripped his wand so hard his knuckles paled. "Not good." Scott suddenly ran to the door. "Diffindo!" he cried. He raced forward and slashed with his wand. The spell should have turned into a blade and cut through the wood, but the attack met resistance. Dense ancient runes flared across the door. "What's going on?" Greaves and Milton ran over. "It's Medea's magic fluctuation," Milton said. "Suddenly appeared inside the house." Scott frowned. Impossible. Apparition is forbidden here. Don't forget how I got in, Scott muttered. He flicked his wand again. Gung near. Golden light coalesced into a long spear that struck the door. Scott pulled the wand into his left hand, gripped the spear with his right, and swung inward. Inside, old Mr. Graves sat slumped on the sofa facing the door, head bowed, expression blank. Medea stood behind the sofa. Father! Greaves cried. Old Mr. Graves remained motionless. What did you do? Greaves demanded, turning on Medea. Nothing. Medea's tone was brittle and impatient. Just watched a joke. What did you do to my father? Greaves insisted. Medea went very cold. Let him bear the punishment he deserves. Scott moved before anyone could stop him. He thrust the golden spear at her. The light flashed and vanished. For an instant, Medea's form shattered like pottery, diffindo, and ceramic shards clattered to the floor. She escaped beforehand, Scott said, a little regret in his voice. Father! Grandfather! Milton and Charles rushed to old Mr. Graves and supported his drooping shoulders. Greaves reached out and checked for breath. Good thing. He's just unconscious. Greaves exhaled. Quick, we must go to St. Mungo's. He bent to lift his father, but a voice stopped him. It's useless. Old Mr. Graves's voice came, not from the body on the couch, but from the landscape painting on the wall. Everyone turned. The portrait of old Mr. Graves now spoke. What? Greaves demanded. Scott stared at the painting. The portrait's face mirrored the same tired features. It's useless, the portrait repeated. I'm beyond saving. Father, what do you mean? Greaves asked. She shattered my soul. That body is an empty shell, the portrait said. Greaves' eyes widened. But they're still breathing. That's an illusion. The soul has been shattered but not yet left the body. What did she do to you? Greaves asked. She killed me. The portrait's tone was oddly calm, his expression peaceful. The one who imprisoned the soul was myself. Father? Greaves stared at the painting, bewildered, then fury overtook him. Why? Why would you refuse her that damned magic item? Is that thing more important than your life? To Greaves' shock, the portrait did not answer with the old man's usual frost. He smiled. Because there is no magic item. What? Greaves and Milton stared, shocked. Foolish, the portrait laughed. Our family line has only passed through 3 generations. How could there be such a powerful artifact? But everyone says, Greaves began. That's what I deliberately spread. The portrait said, smug. I let people believe I had a powerful item to deter others, to help the Graves name rise in the magical world. A lie? Greaves said, incredulous. You actually lost your life because of a non-existent magic item? What were you thinking? I did it for Graves, the portrait said. I wanted others to believe we weren't defenseless. You weren't going to tell us? Why not come clean and say there was no such item? Greaves' breath came fast. You actually lost your life for that. This was worth it, the portrait insisted. It kept others at bay. But Slytherin knows now, Greaves snarled. She knows your lie, and she'll tell her people. They'll laugh at you, spit on our name. The portrait sighed. I intended to take the secret to the grave so everyone would keep believing the item existed. Were you prepared to die? Milton asked, voice shaking. Yes. The portrait's affection toward Milton, the real man's affection, showed through. I knew my house couldn't withstand Slytherin. If I died protecting the supposed item, she'd never learn the truth, but Scott stepped closer. Do you know how she got in? I don't. The portrait shook his painted head. She appeared behind me, used Imperio, and when she learned the truth, she took my life. Even so, you prepared in advance, didn't you? Scott pressed. The portrait's face looked helpless and a little proud. It seems you saw my arrangements. Scott eyed the motionless body on the sofa. You made 2 sets of preparations. What do you mean? Greaves and Milton asked. Scott explained quietly to the men standing nearest. Old Mr. Graves had prepared his corpse and soul as alchemical materials, intending to leave a real trump card for the Graves family. As Scott ran a hand over the old man's skin, faint red patterns glowed where runes had been carved. He hasn't used magic for a long time, Scott murmured. He carved runes and stored his power inside his body. There's even a runic circuit to contain his soul. I've been preparing for 3 years, the portrait said. But it's not complete, Scott observed. There is one last step, the portrait answered. Charles, take my body to the basement. I have arranged everything. You will complete the final step. No, Greaves was horrified. I can't agree to that. I won't. How foolish, the portrait scolded. Are you going to let my efforts go to waste? Greaves still shook his head. Milton stared at the couch in a blank stupor, tears silently falling. Scott stepped outside. He shouldn't be involved in what came next. Whatever Greaves decided was Graves' private business. Outside the gate, a battle had occurred. Dumbledore and Moody had already apprehended several green robbers, Mrs. Zabini among them. Scott approached the gate, activated the runes, tapped a few nodes in the runic circuit, pushed the door open, and walked out. Professor, Mr. Moody Tonks, he greeted. How is it inside? Tonks asked. Scott shook his head. By the time I got in, old Mr. Graves was already killed by Medea. She was possessing a ceramic doll and left before I could stop her. Tonks patted his shoulder. That's not your fault. I know. Scott didn't feel responsible. He turned to the restrained Mrs. Zabini. Excuse me, do you know how Medea got into the house? Mrs. Zabini smiled. You can guess, boy. We asked her too, but she wouldn't say, Tonks said. Her occlumency is very strong. Can Veritaserum be used? Scott asked. Tonks shrugged. That would require higher approval. Mrs. Zabini's smile didn't falter. I haven't committed any crime. Veritaserum is illegal. Everyone looked at her. What's wrong? She asked, fearless. I only came to handle a family dispute and happened to witness my father's unfortunate murder. This clearly has nothing to do with me. You can all testify that I did nothing, can't you? Moody moved to clamp a hand over her mouth. We need to go in and take a look. He led 2 Aurors into the courtyard. They emerged shortly afterward, and Moody escorted the green robbers away in chains. Scott and Dumbledore remained. Scott didn't tell Dumbledore about old Mr. Graves' lie and the plans. He didn't ask Greaves whether he would follow through with the portrait's request. They offered whatever comfort they could. After Greaves moved his father's body, Scott searched the house thoroughly, trying to find how Medea had breached it. To keep Milton from falling apart, Scott enlisted him to search too, and managed to get him to participate. Now that I think about it, Mrs. Zabini's act earlier was clearly meant to buy time, Scott said quietly. We all thought she was just playing dumb to avoid the Auror's questioning, Milton replied. And she knew your grandfather's personality, Scott added. She used his temper to make him close the door himself. Perhaps my grandfather had already thought of it. He deliberately cooperated with Mrs. Zabini to close the door, Milton said, voice tight. He just didn't want to involve us. Scott didn't contradict him. Whether Milton's grandfather had really intended that or not, Milton was determined to believe it. Scott wouldn't be tactless enough to argue. Here. He stopped and looked up at the ceiling. He stepped onto a chair, enlarged it until he could reach the plaster, and touched the center. As his magic met the surface, a lattice of intricate runic circuits shimmered into being. Something had been concealed in the ceiling, and the runes were dampening magical signatures, limiting Scott's perception. He pushed through the barrier, pried out an unremarkable stone, shrank the chair back, and examined what he'd taken down. There's an alchemical component inside, he told Milton. He split the stone and revealed a circular metal disc. Runes were etched across its face. Scott forced the charm on the disc to respond with his magic. It's a device for breaking spatial restrictions and for positioning. He handed it to Dumbledore, who studied it for a long moment and nodded. It's a paired alchemical item, Dumbledore said. Ms. Zabini has something like a portkey. Only by combining the two could she override the wards in this room. It's similar to the feather I used for spatial jumps and positioning. Scott said. Ms. Zabini's command of spatial charms is formidable, Dumbledore observed, and then gave the disc to Mr. Greaves. That's Zabini's doing, Mr. Greaves snapped. A while ago, this house was accessible to her. She slipped this up into the ceiling when we weren't watching. We have no proof, Milton pointed out. She's already been taken by the Aurors, but the Ministry will struggle to convict her for what happened today. Mr. Greaves' voice trembled a little. I know. She's pure blood and well-connected. Her influence is not to be underestimated. Scott felt a flush of irritation with himself. I'm sorry. If I'd been more attentive earlier, like now. Milton waved it off. This isn't your fault. We were all distracted by the chaos outside. You didn't have time to perceive carefully. You did your best, Mr. Greaves said softer. They meant it, but Scott still chastised himself inwardly. His sudden surge in power had perhaps made him careless. This was a lesson and a warning. He vowed not to be so reckless again, to attend to every detail. Dumbledore patted his shoulder. "I'm fine, Professor," Scott said quietly. "I was just reflecting." They consoled Mr. Greaves and Milton for a few more minutes, and then Dumbledore and Scott returned to Hogwarts. Milton stayed behind to deal with the affairs that followed his grandfather's death. He and Mr. Greaves had matters to settle. Back at school, every student looked at Scott with curiosity. News of his abrupt departure from class had already spread. "Scott, what happened earlier? Professor Snape looked like he'd bitten off a toad. Ravenclaw lost 20 points. Scott deflected the prying classmates, only briefly telling Roger and Eddie the essentials, and he concealed the truth about Milton's grandfather. Roger and Eddie were indignant when Scott recounted the scene. To them, Medea, Mrs. Zabini, was simply a skilled and immoral dark witch, no better than a dark lord. They raged against her, while Scott's thoughts turned elsewhere. Twice now, Medea had ambushed him while inhabiting only a ceramic doll. She never showed her true form, and Scott had no reliable way to track or strike her. He had relied on the unavoidable Gungnir, and his offensive magic was strong, but Gungnir required line of sight. It didn't pierce spatial barriers in the way mythic artifacts do. To make a truly inescapable attack, he'd need to combine Gungnir with the spatial system represented by Yggdrasil. He thought it through. If he could latch onto an opponent's soul aura while casting, then Gungnir could pursue them no matter where they fled. That would be impossible to evade. He could not sit still at the idea. He sprang up and left the dormitory. "Where are you going?" Eddie asked. "I've had a new idea," Scott threw back. He ran to the common room, told Helena, and then went to the room of requirement. When the study door opened, Helena slipped through the wall and the portrait of Ravenclaw joined them. Scott quickly explained his plan and asked for help. Ravenclaw wasn't surprised. "I've considered that direction once," she said. "The difficulty is enormous. Still, as you deepen your mastery of those two super charms, it is a plausible development." Helena frowned. "Is that something only possible in the far future?" "It's an expectation, not a certainty," Ravenclaw answered. "If you want to try, start with the fundamental runes. You've only mastered some of them." "I thought so," Scott said. "Time, though, might already be running out." "Time turners are another route," Ravenclaw suggested. "They draw upon the future. For someone in your position, they're the easiest way to buy leverage." "I've never approved of students using time turners," Helena said, wrestling with the thought. "They're dangerous. Don't go back more than 5 hours, and under no circumstances meet your past self." Scott nodded. He would go all in. In addition to applying for a time turner, he would request exemption from classes and petition to use the diadem. With the diadem, he could save time on study, and with Arithmancy's assistance during experimentation, he could avoid many blind alleys. He left the room of requirement and explained his requests to Dumbledore and to Professor Flitwick. Both men knew the prophecy and the scale of the task before Scott. They readily agreed to his requests. Back in the dormitory, Scott told Roger and Eddie he would no longer attend regular classes. "I'll cover your supplies," Eddie said, thumping his chest. "You'll need potions to restore stamina when you time turn. If Felix Felicis is needed for a crucial moment, I'll brew it. Leave potions to me." "I'll bring you meals if you don't have time to eat," Roger added. Scott accepted their offers without ceremony, feeling a little less alone against the problem that had been nagging at him: how to make Gungnir truly unavoidable. After mastering the basics of Rune, Scott took 2 days off, then plunged back into intensive time regression practice. He began experimenting with dismantling and recombining 2 branches of high magic. He knew it would be hard. The reality of the work was harder than he had imagined. With the crown and his arithmancy as aids, he could only keep trying, again and again. Time slipped by quietly in the blur of rewound days and sleepless nights. By the time he stopped the constant reversing and repetition, it was already June, NET season. The nastily exhausting wizarding tests were, in effect, Hogwarts graduation. Passing them meant officially finishing 7th year. Only after his research subsided did Scott notice how much he had changed in the mirror. For everyone else, only 4 months had passed. For Scott, it had been 2 years. He was now 19. He had grown a little taller. His features looked older. He didn't regret it. None of it had been wasted. Then came the exams. No surprises. He passed and took every certificate he wanted. After the exams, Scott convened Babel Tower's founding members. In the conference room they gathered, Roger, Milton, Fred, George, Eddie, Caccini, and those closest to him asked, perhaps a little anxiously, "Has your research been successful?" "It's successful but still needs work," Scott answered. "I haven't fully stress-tested it, so I don't know the maximum attack range yet." He was reasonably satisfied. The others congratulated him, then conversation turned to plans after graduation. "This meeting is mainly for the 7th-year members. Roger, Milton, Fred, George. I want to hear what each of you plans to do next." "We're opening a joke shop," Fred announced proudly. "It's what we've always wanted," George added. "I'll keep studying music," Milton said. "If I dive deeper into music itself, I can improve my music magic." Roger shrugged. "I haven't decided." Eddie stood up. "Didn't I tell you? We're starting a media company, controlling the major publicity channels in the magical world." He grinned at everyone. "Wait for me a year." "I'm still aiming for Magic Network TV," Eddie went on. "Print media in the British magical world is monopolized. We need a different route." "Maybe we can start making plans," Fred suggested. "I have to finish a few things first," Scott said. "It'll be over soon," Luna said unexpectedly. Scott smiled and nodded. After the meeting, he had little interest in daily Babel Tower affairs. His graduation felt like a hinge on the future. He had a sense the events the prophecy hinted at were about to begin. On the eve of graduation, Ravenclaw held its usual farewell party. After Professor Flitwick's speech, Scott found himself unusually popular. Besides his yearmates, younger students who normally kept to themselves came to talk. He handled it easily, circulating until he finally sank onto a sofa at the edge of the common room to watch Milton perform on stage. Luna soon moved through the crowd and sat beside him. She wore a glittery, cake-like dress, and her hair was tousled from dancing. She looked a little wild. "Congratulations on graduating," she said, raising a glass. "Thanks." Scott clinked his cup against hers. Luna took a slow sip of butterbeer and drifted into thought. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "What I'll do after I graduate," she said. "Maybe become a magical creature conservationist, help move creatures to the new world we'll create." "That's a long way off," Scott said with a smile. "By the time that new world exists, you'll have graduated years ago, or maybe we'll never see it." Luna turned to him, her silver-gray eyes clouded. "I told you it will be over soon, very soon." Scott blinked. "I thought you meant Avalon." "No," she said. "Everything." Scott's surprise deepened. "Everything? The prophecy and the ideal future, could they happen at the same time?" "Perhaps," Luna smiled, not giving a clear answer. Scott let it go. They chatted idly for the rest of the night. The next morning at Hogsmeade Station, the train waited. Scott and his roommates took one last long look at the castle across the Black Lake before boarding. "We're leaving," Roger said, a little sad. "We may never come back." Milton's eyes reddened. Caccini reached out and ruffled Roger's hair. "Most British wizards visit Hogsmeade a lot." "That's not the same," Roger protested. "Even if we come to Hogsmeade, we can't go into Hogwarts anymore." Scott stepped onto the carriage and laughed softly. "You could always buy tickets to the Hogwarts inter-house Quidditch matches every November." Laughter replaced the gloom. Roger clapped Scott on the shoulder. "You could apply to be a professor, you know. You used to talk about it." "If not for everything else, I would have applied to stay," Scott said. "There's no better place to study magic than Hogwarts." "Oh, you'll succeed," Roger teased in Luna's sing-song tone. "Soon." "Shut up." Caccini pushed him away and sat by the window, clearly wanting one more look at the castle. "If you miss Hogwarts too much, I can set up a live broadcast from inside," Eddie joked. "At least for a year." The whistle blew and the train pulled away. Another group of young wizards left Hogwarts for a new future. At King's Cross, Scott greeted Roger's and Eddie's fathers, then went on with Milton to Milton's flat. Milton stepped into the Odin's Eye space there as planned. Scott, meanwhile, used a spatial traversal and went home to Madrid. "Congratulations on your graduation, dear," his mother Amelia greeted him with a tight hug. "Oh, you've grown again. Have you changed a lot in the last 6 months?" "Thanks, Mom. I'm fine." Scott patted her back gently. You're not planning to leave right away, are you? Amelia's eyes shone. Or we could move back to Britain. Oh, and I haven't told you yet, the house in Hastings has been renovated. Scott glanced at his father, Michael, lounging on the sofa. Michael simply shrugged, mouthing a helpless expression. Sorry, Mom, Scott said, then quickly smoothed things over. He told her he had a graduation trip to take, trying to keep her hopes in check. Michael added, Scott's a strong wizard. He belongs in the magical world, not stuck living in the Muggle world where he can't use magic freely. Amelia bristled at that, and it took both father and son a while to calm her down. A day later, Scott saw Milton and his family off on a plane bound for the Far East. To avoid causing trouble by staying in the Odin's Eye space during the events to come, they'd chosen to travel far away. Back in Madrid, Scott resumed his research. Without the crown and without regular access to a time turner, his pace was much slower. He sometimes wished he could storm the ministry and take the time turner back. He had tasted how valuable it was. After long, intensive use, he'd even felt addicted. That was why he'd returned it before the exams. Playing with time was too dangerous. Letting it go when he did had probably been a wise choice. A little while later, Scott received a message from Savannah. The sacred tree had recovered and could open the passage to Avalon at any time. Scott said goodbye to his parents and went straight to the Oak Sea. This time, he didn't wait on the shore. He transformed into a peregrine falcon and flew to the heart of the Oak Sea, where the sacred tree stood. From above, the canopy was enormous. Since his last visit, it seemed to have nearly doubled, blotting the sun. He dove through the layers of branches and finally reached Stonehenge, hidden beneath the foliage. A crowd of druids had already gathered outside. As Scott landed and shifted back into human form, all eyes turned toward him. Long time no see, he said, walking up to Savannah and her grandfather. Long time, Savannah replied. She wore a solemn, ancient ceremonial robe and carried herself with priestess-like gravity. She wasn't blushing this time. Scott, someone called. He turned to see a tall, red-headed young man step forward. You are? Hello, I'm Aaron. The newcomer bowed deeply. It was Aaron, Savannah's brother. Scott raised an eyebrow. Aaron, Savannah's brother. Hello. The bow intensified the attention on them both. The druid's gazes tightened. Scott didn't indulge in grudges. He only said, That's past. The important thing now is opening the passage. Old Doherty, Savannah's grandfather, moved to preside over the rite. Scott stepped back to watch. The ritual began. The druids took their places within Stonehenge. Aaron participated too. Savannah walked from the perimeter toward the stone temple near the sacred tree's base. As she moved, the massive standing stones around her began to light, each one flaring with a large rune. Scott squinted, studying them. These were the initial runes. Savannah circled the sacred tree, then paced among the great stones, and one by one they all ignited. The air above each monolith trembled, producing a low, spreading vibration. Runes also glowed on the ground inside Stonehenge. Scott narrowed his eyes and mentally cataloged the patterns, analyzing the layout. Although the runes were the same initial marks, the druids' way of using them diverged from the ancient wizard's approach, an entirely different line of thought. It was unexpectedly inspiring. Leaves in the vast canopy began to ripple, though there was no breeze. Golden patterns crawled down the tree's thick, rough bark, flowing from crown to roots until they met the runes on the ground. For a moment, everything fell deathly silent. Motion seemed to freeze. Then a blinding light washed the world. People had to squint. Scott pulled out a pair of sunglasses and put them on. A long wolf howl cut through the hush. Howl, howl, howl. Wolf calls rose and fell, and the atmosphere that had been frozen moments before surged into life. 555. Entering Avalon. The dazzling light slowly faded, and Scott could finally take in the scene before him. The entire sacred tree had turned to gold, a molten glow flowing like water through the air. All the druids had shifted into wolf form, howling in unison at the sky. Only Savannah remained human, kneeling before the temple at the tree's roots and intoning a prayer in a language Scott didn't know. He removed his sunglasses and watched silently as the ritual continued. When the howls died away, a clear, beautiful music rose from the sacred tree, and from its leafy canopy poured countless mountain forest fairies, darting like notes of song as they played and sang. The druids reverted to human form and dropped to their knees, echoing Savannah's invocations. As the collective prayer swelled, the great stones of the Stonehenge began to move. The megaliths, which until then had seemed haphazardly placed, shifted and slid until they formed several concentric rings. Threads of golden light condensed into lines and wove together into an intricate net, its pattern suspended in the air. A vibration thrummed through the air. At the stone temple's entrance, in front of Savannah, a small black dot formed, then expanded into a pitch-dark corridor. The air ceased to hum, and a wind began to flow, funneling itself into the void. After 1,000 years, Old Duart rose and raised his arms, his voice booming across the clearing. The druids have reopened the passage to the Holy Land, Avalon. Cheers rose from the gathered druids. Savannah stood and looked back at Scott. He nodded and stepped forward. Every head turned to watch him. No one spoke. He walked into the stone circle and approached Savannah. Only when he stood beside her did he speak. "Thank you for the Doherty family's help," he said, bowing to the assembled people. He turned and fixed his gaze on the Black Passage. "This is a feud that's lasted a millennium." Savannah met his stare. "The massacre by Slytherin is a wound passed down through the Doherty family for generations," she said, then began to move toward the mouth of the passage. "Wait." Scott reached out and caught her arm. "You're going in?" "Of course." Savannah's smile was small but steady. "Avalon is the Druids' holy land. I'm your best guide." "It's too dangerous." Scott looked to old Duarte, silently urging him to intervene. But the elder only smiled and said, "Savannah is the priest of this generation and the Druids' leader. Entering Avalon to end a 1,000-year feud is her duty." Scott frowned. "Even if the one we face is Salazar Slytherin, I'm not willing to be the one who has to protect everyone in that kind of battle." "Don't underestimate my granddaughter, lad." Old Duarte's eyes were kind but firm. "She's the most talented druid in centuries." Scott glanced at Savannah, still slight and young, but she held herself with a calm confidence that steadied him. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I can barely protect myself, let alone you." "You don't need to protect me, Scott," Savannah said. "I can help you." She raised her right hand and began murmuring a spell. Above them, the giant golden pattern began to shrink. From the sacred tree, countless motes of golden light rose like fireflies and gathered, forming a single golden branch. It descended into Savannah's hand. The glow waned, and the branch became an ordinary-looking wooden staff. Scott felt her magic surge, tenfold, palpable and strong. "You," he stared, astonished. "How is that?" Savannah asked, still smiling. "I can protect myself, and I can help you. The terrain inside Avalon is tortuous. Without my guidance, reaching the center will be almost impossible." "All right." Scott let go of her arm. If things grew perilous, he could still use his own magic to shield her. Seeing his agreement, Savannah's smile became genuine. "Then let's go." "We can't leave yet." Scott turned and looked toward the forest at the edge of the circle. From the oaks, a group of people in green robes emerged, led by Medea. "Well done," Medea said, eyeing the Black Passage with obvious satisfaction. "I was wondering how we would reach Avalon. You opened the way for us." The druid stiffened at the mention of Slytherin. Old Duart demanded, "How did you find this place?" Medea waved, and a shorter figure stepped forward, drawing back a hood. Red hair like Savannah's fell over her shoulders. "Maeve?" Savannah breathed. "It's me." The woman looked slightly older than Savannah. "Long time, Savannah." Savannah whispered to Scott, "That's my cousin, Maeve. She and some druids left earlier rather than stay to face Slytherin. They swore a magical oath never to reveal the sacred tree or Avalon, so I don't know how." "Was Maeve the one who helped Aaron send that port key as a gift to you?" Scott asked. "That's her." Savannah's face darkened, and she turned to the crowd. "Aaron!" From among the newcomers, a young man grinned, shrugging theatrically. "It was me, dear sister." The druids bristled. "Why would you betray the Doherty family?" someone spat. 3 of the nearest druids shifted into wolves and lunged. "Medea, watch out!" Maeve cried. Aaron laughed and threw himself into the air, transforming into an eagle. He landed beside Maeve, just out of reach. She rushed forward to hug him, but he stepped back, playful and evasive. "Maeve," Savannah sneered. "You keep acting foolish for Aaron. He's never said he likes you." "You're lying," Maeve screeched, looking between Aaron and Savannah. "Tell her, Aaron. Say you love me." Aaron flashed a dazzling smile. "Don't say that, Savannah. He turned to Maeve and said lightly, Maeve is my cousin. Of course I like her. He winked. But compared to a cousin, I prefer you, my biological sister. Maeve's face crumpled. Sister? I told you I don't want to be your sister. Enough, Erin said, patting her head condescendingly. We're not the main characters here. Maeve immediately quieted. Sorry, Miss Slytherin. She bowed, then glanced nervously up at Medea and apologized to her as well. Medea's reply was cool but civil. You didn't disturb me. Then Medea turned to Scott. I'll enter Avalon with you. Scott arched an eyebrow. What are you planning in there, Medea? You'll see. She smiled enigmatically. Will you let me in, or will you stop me? Letting you in is a gamble, Scott said. Medea laughed softly. So you'll gamble. I need to think, Scott answered evenly. Medea reached a decision for him. Whether you like it or not, I'm going in. That's not necessarily true. Scott smiled in return, hinting at some unseen leverage. Medea's interest flickered. It seems you already have a bargaining chip. You're perceptive. Scott compactly refused to explain. Savannah leaned close. You want her to come in? Scott shrugged. You sensed my hesitation. Let's take that gamble. He stepped toward the black corridor. Wait for me. Savannah followed. The world telescoped. Scott's vision closed and then reopened. He was standing in an oak forest, Savannah at his back, and the passage had vanished. This is the outer perimeter, she said, scanning the trees. The passage teleported us here. We can only return after we reach Avalon's center. What if Medea comes in? Scott asked. She'll appear at a random spot somewhere in the perimeter, Savannah replied. We may not reach the center at the same time. They set off. The oak trees repeated in endless patterns. Scott checked his watch. The hands spun unnaturally fast. Time lost meaning. Without Savannah's lead, he would have been hopelessly lost. After what he estimated to be half an hour, Savannah stopped. Can't you sense it? She asked. Scott shook his head. This place doesn't seem very friendly to me. Savannah smiled and raised her staff, striking the ground. Thick vines erupted, writhing outward. A chorus of wolf howls answered, and enormous, bull-sized gray wolves emerged from between the trunks. Scott's wand was already in his hand, but he felt his magical senses dull here. He couldn't perceive their power the way he normally did. This is Avalon, Savannah said. You can't sense enemies here the way you usually do. You must rely on nature's power. So, do we kill them? Scott asked. Of course. Savannah chanted and sent more vines slithering like great pythons. Wolves lunged. Some were snared and immobilized. Others dodged and charged. Scott was about to act when he felt the rhythm of Savannah's magic and lowered his wand. Savannah brought her staff down hard. The vines multiplied and braided into a dense net that trapped the pack. Thorns sprouted all along the binding growths, and the wolves' howls turned to cries of pain. I thought they could cast spells, Scott muttered later, watching the trapped wolves. Savannah shook her head. Their magic only enhances their bodies, strengthening them, sharpening teeth and claws. They don't cast like wizards. Let's go. Savannah turned and walked on. Scott followed. Those wolves don't seem intelligent. Are they just beasts? He asked. They started out as beasts, Savannah said. They only gained magic from living in the Holy Land. So there must be a lot of beasts here? Plenty. She suddenly looked up. Scott followed her gaze and saw a huge leopard crouched on an oak branch, watching them. He raised his wand without a sound. The branch beneath the leopard stiffened, binding the animal before it could spring. The leopard roared and raked at the branches with its claws and teeth. With a violent twist, it bit through one limb and began to free itself. Scott flicked his wand. Defindo. An invisible blade of magic cut the leopard's throat. Blood spurted. Both of them took a step back. They continued on, and the forest only grew more dangerous. Most of the creatures were large and aggressive. Even the herbivores attacked. Dealing with constant assaults slowed their progress. By noon, they were still trapped in the oak woods. This forest is even bigger than your oak sea, Scott said, sitting on a tree root. He checked the meat roasting over the fire, took out a bottle of butterbeer, and offered it to Savannah. Since they couldn't open the Odin's Eye space inside Avalon, they had to picnic like this. It'll take us a whole day to get out of here. Savannah accepted the drink, pulled the cork, and took a long swallow. Scott took another bottle, drank, and said, Legends say Avalon is ringed by swamps, forests, and mist. You can only enter by small boat. The legend's true, she nodded. After this oak forest comes the swamp. She sliced the roast with a small knife. Scott idly turned a piece of wood into a plate and cutlery. The boat's your business, he said. She handed him the plate. Thank you. Building a boat won't be a problem. They ate, rested, then resumed their trek. Scott asked, Druids can tame these beasts, right? Use them as helpers? I can, Savannah said, but there's no need. They're still too weak. Scott looked thoughtful. Are there stronger ones ahead? There are, she replied with a faint smile. Not tremendously strong, but useful. So you have a clear goal, he said. This is all in my family's old records, she told him. My ancestors served the fairy queen who ruled Avalon. We know this place well. They spent the afternoon fighting off more beasts. Before night fell, they finally emerged from the oaks and reached the lip of a vast swamp. Scott peered up at the dim sky. Looks like there's a normal day-night cycle here. Crossing the swamp at night is dangerous, Savannah said. We should wait until morning. Scott agreed and stared at the water, flat and mirror smooth. Is there anything in it? Lake nymphs once lived here, she said. They're gone now, but they left the Green Knight. The Green Knight? Scott had heard the name, an invisible, intangible magical creature with intelligence and deadly power. Savannah explained, it obeys only the lake nymphs. Since they vanished, it attacks anything that crosses the swamp. Why don't we just fly over? Scott asked. Savannah looked at the darkening sky. The air above this swamp is forbidden. He raised his wand and produced a crow, sending it across the water. As it crossed the swamp, the bird began to fall, wings flapping wildly. Scott tried to pull it back, but the glassy lake bubbled. Water rose and congealed into a towering humanoid figure, an axe formed of water in its hand. It brought the weapon down and split the crow in half. 2 green eyes shone in its head as it turned towards them. The Green Knight, Scott said, studying it. So its body is made of water. Savannah nodded. It's invisible and intangible, more mysterious than a ghost. When it attacks, it gathers water into a human form. It can make weapons, mounts, anything from the swamp. And if that water body is smashed, it simply disperses. You don't truly harm it. She met the Green Knight's gaze. But it won't attack us so long as we stay out of the swamp's reach. The figure dissolved, falling back into the pond. Wisps of mist began to rise, then more, until the entire swamp lay in a quick-moving fog. Is this the danger? Scott asked. If they crossed at night, the mist would be so thick they couldn't see, they'd lose their way, and the Green Knight could condense directly from the fog. In fog, the Green Knight can even form itself out of the mist, Savannah said. It's very dangerous. Scott gathered dry branches and prepared a bonfire. How do we fight them? With fire, Savannah answered and came to help. Hold torches and they won't come near. But they can bore under the boat, Scott said. So our boat must be sturdy, she replied with a small smile. They found a clearing, built a fire, and sat. What if we want to kill the Green Knight? Scott asked. Very high-temperature fire, Savannah said. If you can instantly evaporate the water that makes up its body, you destroy it. Scott nodded and ate. They talked, a mention of Salazar Slytherin having once come here, and of Medea Slytherin, about getting to Apple Island before her. Savannah implied the family records told everything. Scott suggested Medea might not do what her father expected. They laughed and bickered about bets, but neither pressed the other for details. After dinner, Scott set up 2 tents near the bonfire, ran defensive and warning enchantments around them, and they slept. Dawn came peaceful. Scott emerged to find Savannah already up, watching the sunrise glow on the swamp. Morning, she said. He joined her. The fog had lifted. The water reflected the sky like a warm mirror. She mentioned a story Luna had told her about the Babel Tower and the idea of crafting a world of wizards and magic alone. Scott had explained that false suns couldn't sustain life. If Avalon and the Odin's Eye space had living things, their sunlight must be real somehow. He and Savannah traded observations. Then Savannah reminded him, "You should build the boat." "Right," he said. After breakfast, Scott felled an oak, cleaned and hollowed it, and transformed the trunk into a small boat that could seat 4. Savannah frowned. That won't stand up to a Green Knight's attacks. It's not finished yet. He waved his wand, and a bright silver humanoid shimmered into being. What is that? Combat alchemical doll, Scott said. He had anticipated being stuck without the Odin's Eye and had converted his combat alchemical dolls and summoned beasts into contract standby forms that he could summon here. They weren't true life, so the Crowflock contract didn't apply. He used a different contract held in the Vergelmere ring, the same one recorded on the beast skin scroll he took from Jotunheimr. The silver alchemical figure flowed around the hull and bottom of the boat like quicksilver, sealing and reinforcing it. Scott nodded and gestured again. Edgar, Serain. Two other figures appeared, Edgar and Serain, already transformed. Firecrow Edgar took on a human shape with fiery hair, a pointed crow-shaped mask, and folded red-feathered wings. Sailfish Serain had become a fish-headed humanoid, scales gleaming, webbed hands and feet, and fins like banners along his back. Scott turned to them. You'll escort us. They both bowed in understanding. Without needing instructions, they knew their role. Scott pushed the boat into the water. Serain sent a surge of water from the stern, and the little craft began to glide. Edgar took the bow. Keep ready, Savannah warned. Water figures rose all around them and attacked. Knights of living water charged, mounted on watery horses and wielding axes and spears. Edgar spread his wings and flung his hands wide. Blazing flames erupted and formed a ring of fire around the boat, rolling outward. Any green knight that touched the flame vaporized, others fell back into flowing water. The ring reformed and rotated, a continuous barrier. The boat shuddered. Scott and Savannah looked down at the decking. It's holding, Scott said. The alchemical doll would protect the bottom. He turned to Serain. Accelerate, Serain obliged. The water at the stern boiled and roiled. The boat shot forward like an arrow released from a bow, cutting through the swamp at speed. 557. War on the Swamp. The little boat cut through the water, and the ranks of green knights multiplying on the swamp grew thicker by the minute. Because Edgar controlled the flames, none of the mounted figures dared come too close. They held their riding postures and maintained a wide encirclement, following the boat from a distance. Even so, they never stopped attacking. After repeatedly striking at the bottom of the boat with no success, they switched to attacking the surface, shaping flowing water into spears and whips and hurling them toward the boat. Their strikes were frequent but ineffective. Edgar's flames vaporized many of the projectiles, and Serain's control of the water countered the rest. The boat's speed never dropped, and Scott and Savannah remained still as statues. Gradually, the barrage thinned and finally ceased. The Green Knights did not leave, however. They kept their formation and rode their steeds of converging water in a continuous ring. This is a rare sight, Scott murmured, holding the magic mirror and replaying the footage he had just taken. The mirror showed the endless green swamp, its glassy surface reflecting sky and cloud. Scores of knights on water steeds galloped across, bodies and mounts formed of translucent water that shimmered in the sun. Cutting through them was a small wooden boat, wrapped in a sheath of flames, racing forward and leaving a long smear of wake behind it. Be careful, Savannah said. They won't let us go easily. Scott snapped the mirror closed and studied the distant riders. Are they preparing for a head-on charge? He asked. They're not stupid. Why throw their lives away? The Green Knights were formed. Those in front and on the flanks slowed and matched speed with the ones behind. In minutes, they had reassembled into a massive cavalry square, its front broad and intimidating. What do they plan to do? Scott asked, wary. They're about to accelerate, Savannah said. Scott heard the phantom sound of hooves as the rear ranks surged. The square lengthened, gathered speed, and the swamp's surface roiled. Waves swelled in front of the array, growing taller and taller. The boat began to pitch. Are they trying to make a tidal wave to capsize? Scott asked with a tight smile. The waves rose to several stories high, the cavalry array seeming to become one with the oncoming tide. Edgar, which had been perched at the bow, beat its wings, vaulted over Scott and Savannah, and settled lightly at the stern. It spread its wings, ready to act. No, Scott said, stopping it. Let Serain handle them. If water and fire met, they'd only produce steam and fog, perfect cover for the Green Knights to exploit. Edgar folded its wings obediently. The flaming ring that had circled the boat dimmed and vanished. Serain leapt from the boat and stood on the water, bracing. The boat halted. Protego, Scott cried, raising his wand. A spherical magic barrier bloomed around the boat, encompassing them. Serain faced the tidal wave with its back to the stern, raised its hands, and roared. Aqua-blue magic pulsed from its form like washing light. When the rushing water met that magic, it froze in place, as if time itself had been paused. Inch by inch, the towering wave collapsed under Serain's force until the water calmed. Scott released the barrier. Serain jumped back on board, and the boat resumed its course. "They haven't given up," Savannah warned. Sure enough, one after another, the Green Knights reformed. Human shapes of converging water reappeared first, then their horse forms, until the neat array rebuilt behind the boat and resumed pursuit. They had learned not to try tidal waves again. Instead, they followed from a distance, gathering more kin. "Are they planning anything else?" Scott asked. Savannah shook her head. "Records on Green Knights are sparse." "Maybe they've given up?" Scott said lightly, but he immediately frowned. "No, they're gathering power." More and more knights rose from the swamp. What had once been dozens swelled to hundreds, and still they kept coming. The army took on the momentum of 10,000 hooves. "If this goes on, can we still be confident?" Savannah asked, watching them. She rose and leaned on her long wooden staff, then sat again. "Perhaps we should thin their numbers." Scott remained seated, calm. "Let me see how many they can muster." "Have you not shown your true power yet?" she asked, curious. "They're only manipulating water," Scott said with a small smile. "If the water freezes, they can't do much." Savannah nodded. "If you could freeze the whole swamp, we could walk across." "Not I," Scott replied, "but Ymir can." "Ymir?" Savannah glanced at Edgar and Siren. "A creature like them?" "No," Scott said. "A giant alchemical puppet I retrieved from a secret realm, an ancient wizard's work." Savannah didn't press further. Both fell silent, eyes fixed on the growing formation. Scott soon could no longer count the Green Knights. They were everywhere. Then the riders merged into waves again, but this time the waves came in succession, each higher than the last. The water turned murky, and the boat was buffeted like a leaf. Scott extended his left hand. The teardrop-shaped ice-blue gem on his Vergelmir ring burned with cold light. It traced the outline of a towering figure in the air. The temperature plummeted. The illusion coalesced into substance, Ymir in full ice armor, massive and immovable. When its feet touched the water, the surface froze, solid, from top to bottom, in the blink of an eye. Ymir's bulk stood firm on the ice, and the swirling waves congealed into glaciers. The boat became locked in ice. "Next, Ymir will carry us across," Scott said. He dismissed Edgar and Siren. The two figures faded at his command. He then stepped onto the ice, dispelled the battle puppet's summoning, and called Ymir closer. The giant knelt and extended one enormous hand. Scott and Savannah leapt onto its palm, then Ymir placed them on its shoulder and strode forward. Where it stepped, the swamp turned to continuous glacier. No more Green Knights rose. "I wanted to save this as a trump card," Scott confessed as Ymir bore them on, "but those Green Knights were getting annoying." He had hesitated to use too much magic and endurance. Edgar and Siren could have handled the Green Knights, but at a much slower pace. Ymir sped things up. Savannah studied him, then looked ahead. "You aren't calm inside. Thanks for the reminder." Scott inhaled deeply, the cold air steadying his emotions. "I should remain composed." He turned to her. "You're calmer than you used to be." Savannah's voice was soft. "Druid cultivation requires me to blend with nature." Scott nodded. In their earlier meeting on Melanesian Island, Savannah had shown changes, but now her magic felt even closer to the rawness of the natural world, subtle and difficult even for Scott to fully sense. "Curious," he added, "I heard druids often change into beasts. Does that mean you keep some wildness inside?" Savannah tilted her head toward him. For a moment, her eyes shifted, no longer clear and ethereal, but hungry and predatory like a beast's. Her magic's feel shifted with it, harder to pin down. Scott made a small, helpless sigh. "So that's how it is." Her eyes returned to normal. Scott watched the endless ice-strewn swamp and, seeing the long road ahead, moved on to another subject, the Babel Tower he had established and his vision of a new world. Would the druids be interested in joining that ideal? Savannah regarded him with an odd look. "I never thought you would someday pursue such a grand ideal." "You saw through me long ago," Scott said. She nodded. "Clever, cunning, indifferent, selfish, lost." Scott gave a dry smile. "So more bad than good. To ordinary people, you're like that, Savannah agreed. But with friends, you behave differently. Scott focused on that last phrase. Lost, he reflected. I wanted to be the Freest Wizard, bound by nothing. Maybe that was being lost. Savannah smiled. This world will always bind you. The more you gain, the more ties you take on. True. Scott's tone relaxed. Parents, relatives, friends, teachers. The more ties I have, the harder it is to let go. I wanted freedom myself, Savannah admitted. I even thought about leaving my druid identity behind to become a true wizard. You chose responsibility in the end, Scott said. I once hated my grandfather for forcing the priesthood on me and resented relatives' expectations. It was suffocating, she said, then gave a relieved smile. But when I fully became a priest, learned druid history, and no one had to push me, I understood what I must do. She raised a hand to cut him off and continued. Do you know why I was so infatuated with you back then? Scott flushed. That's an exaggeration. You weren't mad. Savannah laughed lightly. Maybe I wasn't wild in front of you. Scott stumbled for words. Savannah continued on. You were a gust of wind, so free. You wouldn't be bound like the other little wizards at Hogwarts. You found a way to do whatever you wanted. That freedom made me ache. That was being lost, Scott said softly. I only realized that later, she said. At the time I couldn't see it. We've both grown up, Scott observed. I won't love you like that anymore, Savannah said, offering a small, sincere hand. But I want to thank you. The feeling then was a sweet dream. She looked at him steadily. Now I want to represent the druids and cooperate with you to create a world of magic. 558. Thorns and Silent Forest. Ymir strode through the swamp. Wherever its feet touched, the mire froze into sheets of ice. The Green Knight did not reappear. Before night fell, Scott and Savannah finally saw land ahead. Scott asked, You call this Apple Island? Savannah nodded. Yes, but I don't know much about it. She watched the island dimming in the afterglow of the sun. Even my ancestors, who once served the Fairy Queen, only lived in the oak woods on Avalon's edges. That's fine, Scott said with a smile. Unknown adventures can be interesting. When Ymir reached the shore, Scott ordered it to stop using its freezing power. We should fly over the thorns, he decided. He stood on Ymir's shoulder and looked down. There was no path where the island met the sea, only a wall of dense, thorny vines. The vines were dark green, leafless, and bristling with razor thorns. Savannah watched and said, Ymir could probably just push through. Freezing works on plants. Scott shook his head. Ymir needs to return. This trip has drained a lot of its magic. It can only recharge by returning home, otherwise it'll start drawing from mine. He could have used magic crystals or enchanted gems, but he preferred to save them if possible. Let me try something first. He drew his wand and summoned a crow. The bird cawed, took wing, and flew toward the hedge. The still thorns suddenly shivered. The vines lashed out like a nest of snakes and swallowed the crow whole. Only a few scattered feathers drifted down. What if we fly higher? Scott suggested, preparing to summon another bird to clear the wall from above. No. Savannah stopped him with a single word. Scott turned. Do you have a better idea? Savannah smiled. Don't forget, I'm a druid priest. Without transforming into a bird, she stepped off Ymir's shoulder, staff in hand. A white flash of light shimmered around her. She moved with a cat-like grace and landed lightly on her feet. As she approached the thicket, the vines began to stir. Be quiet, she whispered. She planted the staff into the muddy ground. Tiny motes of green light, like forest fireflies, rose and drifted over the vines. The thorns, which had an otherworldly sheen before, calmed. Savannah's magic wasn't the sickly pallid green of curses. It was the living green of leaves and fresh growth. Move aside, she told the thorns. She stepped forward. The vines reluctantly parted and opened a narrow corridor. Turning to Scott, she said, You can come down now. Okay. Scott leaped from Ymir's shoulder. His black cloak billowed like wings and eased his descent. At the same time, Ymir's enormous form shifted, solid ice becoming a stream of pale blue light that dissolved into the air. Let's go, Scott said. Savannah walked ahead, leaning on her staff. Scott followed. We should get through this before nightfall, she warned. When the moon rises, they won't be so obedient. Why? Scott asked. What happens under moonlight? Savannah explained as they moved. This forest is full of one plant, moon vines. They're aggressive. Druids can command them, but moonlight makes them berserk. Even you can't control them on a moonlit night? Scott pressed. Savannah considered. I could probably suppress them, not fully control them. Scott still liked the idea of flying over. What about going high? Flying might be easier. Savannah glanced up. The sky was orange with sunset, otherwise empty. The sky above Avalon is claimed by something, she said. My family records mention a giant dragon, no name given. Ancestors advised never to fly over the sacred land. It might be just a legend. A giant dragon? Scott raised an eyebrow. Do dragons live that long? He suspected it might be less a dragon and more a vast magical guardian. Savannah shrugged. She wasn't sure either. Scott gave up on arguing. We're in a hurry. Let's move. He reached for a wind spirit, thinking to call Horus, but Savannah raised her staff. A green halo spread and wrapped around them both. Scott's body felt lighter and more powerful, muscles springing to life. Run, she said. She crouched like a cheetah and sprang, a blur of motion. Scott matched her with his newly sharpened agility. Where they ran, the vines reluctantly parted. The light faded as the sky darkened. The moon's coming up, Savannah warned. Scott's breath hitched. Are they afraid of fire? No. Savannah's breathing was steady. They're not. Almost there. Push! Savannah accelerated, carrying her staff without it hindering her. Scott flicked his wand and had his cloak lighten his weight so she wouldn't pull away. They were so close that the vines erupted into frantic growth. Magic sizzled in the air. The plants whipped toward them like a living net. You go first, Scott shouted. Savannah halted. I'll hold them. Protego, Scott shouted, and a huge spherical barrier bloomed around them. He grabbed Savannah's wrist and they surged forward. Vines lashed at the shield, snap, 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 battering it from all sides. Scott kept his wand raised. A thin line of white light ran from its tip to the shield, constantly mending cracks. The vines, denied entry, writhed and coiled more frantically, making every inch of progress an effort. Quiet, Savannah cried, thrusting her staff. A wash of green slowed the vine's motions. Go, she ordered, pulling Scott. I'll keep the shield up, Scott panted. Savannah led, continuously pouring suppression into the plants. After what felt like 20 minutes, they burst out of the thorny forest and collapsed onto a swath of grass, panting. Let's rest, Savannah said. They sat among tufts of green and little white flowers and looked back. Behind them, the thicket writhed like a demon's dance. Ahead lay a silent forest, shrouded in mist. Only the silhouettes of tall trees showed through. Let's camp here for the night, Scott suggested. Savannah agreed. I sense danger in that forest, she said. Do you know what it is? Scott asked. She shook her head. We'll wait for dawn and explore then. They ate a simple meal warmed with a charm from Scott's rations, set a small magic lamp on the ground, and slept. The night passed uneventfully. In the morning, the mist over the next forest had lifted. They crossed the grassy plain, being careful with their steps, and entered. This feels like Hogwarts' forbidden forest, Scott remarked. The trees and plants were familiar to Britain, oaks and beeches, undergrowth like any ordinary wood. Can you still sense danger? He asked. Savannah closed her eyes and listened. She opened them after a long moment. The danger feeling's gone, she said, but something else is wrong. This place feels too ordinary. Too ordinary? Scott frowned. You mean you don't sense anything? Exactly, it's too ordinary. No wild beasts, no birds, not even insects. Scott looked around. The forest was healthy, plants growing normally. Maybe it's the territory of something powerful. Its presence keeps other animals away. There's no natural system like that, Savannah said. In nature, life is interdependent. They decided to keep moving. All morning, they crossed the quiet forest and still saw no animals. They had marked their path, so they weren't lost or walking in circles. At noon, they rested under a tree. Avalon's huge, Scott said. If we hadn't a clear goal, we might never have found Medea. King Arthur's buried at the center of this island, Savannah said softly. Whether it was Salazar Slytherin once or Medea Slytherin now, they'd go there. Scott stretched. Avalon can't hold every wizard in the world, but maybe it could hold every wizard in Britain. Savannah's eyes flickered. This is sacred ground for druids. I know, Scott yawned. But Merlin, he's a wizard. Merlin's a druid, Savannah insisted. He's a wizard. He's a druid. They went in circles until Scott laughed and stood. Let's go, he said. Humph, Savannah replied good-naturedly, and they set off again, treading on thick carpets of fallen leaves. Not far along, they heard water murmuring. A stream lay ahead. On the opposite bank, a herd of unicorns emerged from the trees, their coats pale and luminous as moonlight. They bowed their heads to drink. "No, this isn't right," Savannah breathed. She stepped back and pulled Scott behind a huge trunk. 559. Red Knight and Unicorn Scott cast a quieting spell so sound wouldn't carry. "Is something wrong with that herd of unicorns?" he asked Savannah. Savannah's brow tightened. "Those aren't true unicorns," she said with certainty. "They don't have the purity of a real unicorn." "I didn't sense anything unusual," Scott admitted. They watched the herd drink from the far side of the stream. The animals were pure white and gleaming, lithe and graceful. Their magical signatures looked like the unicorns from the Forbidden Forest. Still, the forest itself felt wrong, and Savannah did not seem mistaken. She whispered, "Wait, let them leave first." Scott nodded. They hid behind a tree and watched through the leaves. After a while, the unicorns finished drinking and turned back into the wood, but as soon as they entered the opposite bank's forest, they vanished. Scott could clearly see they had hardly moved. Their coats were still glaringly white, and there were no obstacles, yet they simply disappeared, as if erased by an invisible hand. "What the hell?" Scott narrowed his eyes. "The forest on that side is dangerous," Savannah said. "Something terrifying lives there." Scott stepped out and peered across the stream. "We still have to go through." He glanced at Savannah. "Only by passing that wood can we reach Avalon's center, right?" "You're right." Savannah came to his side and watched the far bank. "And we must cross before dark. It'll be worse at night." Scott smiled. "Then let's go." He moved toward the stream to hop across using the stepping stones. "Wait, don't touch the water." Savannah stopped him. She drove her long wooden staff into the muddy bank, and a tangle of thick green vines burst up, weaving and stretching rapidly toward the other side until they formed a natural arched bridge. "This is safer," she said, stepping onto it. "I can make it safer." Scott waved his wand lazily. The vine bridge shifted color, glinting as if metallic. Inch by inch, he altered its substance to titanium alloy. Savannah only nodded and climbed on. Together, they reached the center of the arch. Suddenly, the stream beneath them churned. Scott looked down, and the shallow brook had become a bottomless pool. A monstrous vortex was forming on one side of the bridge. "Run!" Savannah grabbed Scott's hand, green aura flaring as she pulled him forward. Before they could reach the far bank, the water exploded up from the whirlpool in a spray 4 or 5 meters high. "Fly!" Savannah cried. She released Scott and in a heartbeat transformed into a peregrine falcon, arrowing toward the opposite forest. Scott followed without hesitation, shifting into a falcon and chasing after her. They'd only made a few powerful beats when a vast shadow fell over them. Scott reverted to human form midair and landed. Above them hovered a huge hand made entirely of rushing water, full of swept-up reeds and plants, coming down like an enormous slap. Savannah began to chant. Thick vines with trunks wider than a man but ends sharpened into spear points shot from the bank and hammered into the water hand. She grabbed Scott's wrist and pulled them back. The watery palm collapsed into shapeless spray where the vines struck it. Scott threw up a shimmering protego, and the spray splashed harmlessly against the barrier. "Are there green knights here too?" Scott asked, watching droplets slide down the shield. Savannah shook her head. "I don't know." The water drew itself back into the stream. And then the stream roared, something like a muffled beast sound. "Let's go, leave now," Savannah urged. But before they could move, the unicorns reappeared silently behind them, cutting off their retreat. Savannah whispered, alarmed, "Look at their eyes." The herd's eyes had turned a bleeding red, the color so vivid it seemed to drip. The stream rose again, this time forming a humanoid figure from the water. It resembled the green knights of the swamp, but far larger, towering nearly as tall as Ymir, and it rode no mount. Like the unicorns, its eyes were a mesmerizing blood red. As the red glow deepened, the water composing it stained with crimson. It opened a gaping maw and bellowed. "Is that an oversized green knight?" Scott asked. Savannah's face darkened. "Maybe a red knight." "Red knight? See how it's turned red?" Behind them, the unicorns stamped and lowered their heads, horns leveled and ready to charge. "Did the water corrupt them?" Scott guessed. "Who can say?" Savannah answered. She lifted her staff. Purify! A brilliant green light flared out, washing over the Red Knight and the unicorns. Under that light, crimson smoke began to rise from their mouths and nostrils, and they howled in pain, but they did not retreat. The Red Knight's right arm became a spinning spear of red water and thrust at Scott's barrier, while the unicorns slammed their horns against it one after another. Scott poured more magic into Protego, reinforcing it as thunderous impacts rang out. Savannah's staff continued to glow. Its green light soothed Scott, easing his fatigue and hastening his recovery. Plants and flowers brightened under the radiance, while the Red Knight and the unicorns seemed to suffer, crimson vapor streaming from them. The more smoke that billowed, the less blood-red the night became, and the paler the unicorn's eyes. Pushed by the green light, they hesitated to press on. "Will the purification hold?" Scott asked. "No," Savannah snarled through clenched teeth. "I can only suppress them." "Let me try." Scott pointed his wand up. "Expecto Patronum." A silver light blossomed into the shape of a peregrine falcon. The Patronus cried and shot like a streak of moonlight straight at the Red Knight. The Red Knight hesitated, eager to retreat toward the stream. But light moves faster than water. The Patronus tore through its chest, punching a fist-sized hole. Water should have flowed to fill the gap, but instead a thick crimson smoke poured from the wound and drifted over the surrounding flora, which instantly withered. The unicorns, instead of fleeing, suddenly surged around the Red Knight, breathing the fumes greedily as if addicted. Their eyes flared red once more. The Red Knight bellowed and tried to drive them away, but they ignored it and inhaled the smoke coming from its wound. The Red Knight raised its spinning spear again and rammed one of the unicorns. The water spear shredded the creature, its blood not silver but red. Flesh and blood were sucked into the night, melting into its body and dyeing the water crimson. It roared with renewed vigor and began to rampage through the herd, slaughtering them to heal itself. "Its wound is closing," Savannah warned. Scott nodded. He'd seen how every corpse fed the knight's recovery. "Found its weakness," he called. "Gungnir." The silver Patronus dissolved into smoke and reformed into a long, translucent spear that glowed like moonlight forged into steel. At the sight of it, the Red Knight abandoned the unicorns and plunged back toward the stream. The spear flashed. Time seemed to freeze in a streak of silver, and the Red Knight's movements locked. A hole opened in its waist and spread outward until the water giant simply collapsed and was swallowed by the stream. The turbulent water calmed, returning to normal. A few unicorns still hunched, sucking the last of the crimson smoke. When the fumes were gone, they finally turned to Scott and Savannah. Savannah stopped her spellcasting and looked at Scott. "You can finish them, can't you? If I could avoid killing unicorns, I would." Scott raised his wand. Another silver flash, and the spear returned to him. "Their souls are corrupted," Savannah said quietly. "Let them be free." "Okay." Scott sent the spear forward, and it passed through each of the unicorns like a streak of light. One by one, the beasts collapsed, red blood pooling into the soil. The land around them lay stained and poisoned. Savannah frowned at the blighted earth and raised her staff. Green radiance fell like a soft rain. The carcasses dissolved into the light, the red blood absorbed and cleansed. New shoots pushed up from the ground, and slowly, flowers and grasses returned. Only when the land was verdant again did Savannah stop. "You all right?" Scott asked, watching her closely for signs of strain. "I'm fine." Her breathing was steady. Nurturing nature, that's a druid's instinct. "Let's check," Scott said, drawing the magic barrier back and moving to the stream. "There must be something down there." He knelt at the bank and put his hand into the water, sensing. "There, found it." He reached down and disturbed the stream. Stones tumbled, mud churned, and a long, slim object rose from the bottom and clattered at his feet. Savannah crouched beside him. It was a broken knight's spear, algae streaked and pitted, its original finish eaten away. Scott did not immediately touch it. "It gives me a bad feeling," he murmured. Savannah covered her nose. "The smell of blood is too strong." 560. The island in the middle of the lake in the forest, cleaned anew. Scott's wand swept from spearhead to shaft. The grime and algae flaked away inch by inch, revealing the spear's original finish, bright silver, untarnished, save for nicks and blade scars on the head, evidence of old battles. You said you smelled blood before? Scott sniffed, then looked at Savannah. Can you still smell it? She had not noticed it earlier, and after cleaning, she could no longer detect it either. It's still here, Savannah said, frowning, but it's hidden. Her expression turned serious. Revulsion crept into her eyes as she regarded the spear. Its presence is like a contagion. It will poison the natural world. Is it a magical item? Scott asked, scanning with his magical senses. Nothing unusual registered. He traced a few glowing runes in the air with his wand and flicked them toward the spear. Hiss. Like ice against flame, the runes melted away on contact. Crimson seeped from the spearhead down the shaft. Back! Savannah snapped, hauling Scott backward. Purify. She lifted her long wooden staff and a vibrant green light washed over the spear. Hiss, crimson smoke curled up from the weapon, seeping into the air. The plants Savannah had briefly coaxed into flourishing withered where the smoke drifted. Protego! Scott threw up a barrier, Hiss shielding himself and Savannah from the taint. His translucent silver spear rose and with a thought lunged at the scarlet spear in the grass. Clang! From the crimson smoke, something intercepted his attack. A faint figure coalesced, smaller than the enormous red knight but larger than a normal man. The silver spear flashed again. The figure parried with the blood-stained spear in his hand with skill that matched the speed of Scott's strike. A chilling laugh, threaded with the wails of wronged souls, cut the air. The crimson smoke swirled and the figure became clearer. A man in old knightly armor, scarred and dark with old bloodstains. A hole yawned in his breastplate. His helm covered his face, but two scarlet eyes glowed through the visor. The smoke seemed to sink into him, seeping through the armor's seams. "Who are you?" Scott called as his spear flew back to him. The armored man answered in a hoarse, fractured voice, each syllable jagged as if dragged across metal. "Who am I?" Savannah shook her head. "Not a ghost, not a wight. I've never seen this before." She glanced through her druidic memory. No record in our traditions either. The man raised his voice into a roar that set both of them on edge. "I am." His cry swelled. "Mordred!" "What?" Savannah's shock was immediate. "Mordred, how is that possible?" "I am Mordred," the knight bellowed, eyes darting as if hunting for something beyond them. At that name, he ignored Scott and Savannah completely and turned his voice toward the trees. "Arthur." With that, gripping the bloodied spear, he tore past them like a gale and vanished into the forest. "After him!" Savannah shouted. She surged forward, green energy bursting around her as she dragged Scott along. Mordred ran faster than anything they'd seen. Wherever his boots struck, flowers withered and leaves fell from the tallest trees. Even with Savannah's magic bolstering them, the two of them strained to keep up, trailing far behind him. The chase stretched on and on. Exhaustion clawed at Scott and Savannah, but Mordred never slowed. "This isn't working," Scott panted. "We need to conserve our strength." He drew his wand and transfigured the ground ahead into a two-seater sled. Chanting, he lightened it until it floated, then conjured two giant leopards to pull it. "Hop on." He buckled them in as the leopards roared and tore through the trees. Scott set a barrier orb over the sled to shield them from the wind. Savannah, a little embarrassed, gave a rueful smile. "Sorry, I didn't realize you had this kind of," she paused, "lazy magic. I kept dragging you to run." Scott waved her off, too tired to banter. He passed her a potion for stamina, but she declined. Green motes from her staff drifted down, replenishing both of their energies with druidic magic. The leopards pulled them faster, and soon they saw Mordred ahead again. "Do you think," Scott began. "Do you believe," Savannah said at the same time. They exchanged a look. Scott gestured for her to speak. "Is he really Mordred?" she asked, uncertain. "Who can say?" Scott replied. "But he fits the accounts." Savannah thought back to the old chronicles. At Camlin, Arthur supposedly thrust his spear through Mordred behind his shield. The records only trace Arthur afterward. I don't recall any mention of Mordred's corpse. "Maybe that spear," Scott mused, "was Arthur's, and Mordred's blood and hatred poisoned it. The fairies who took Arthur to Avalon interred him and abandoned the spear in a stream. Perhaps, over time, the blood and resentment turned it into this thing." Savannah gave a bitter half-smile. A common narrative. Still, following him might tell us the truth. They followed until dusk once more, when Mordred burst out of the gloom into the last light of day. Beyond the forest lay a stretch of grass, and then a small lake, much smaller than the swamp around Apple Island. The far shore was clearly visible. Mordred reached the water's edge and stared at the glassy surface where the sky was mirrored, at the little island in the center. "Are there apple trees on that island?" Scott whispered. "Yes," Savannah answered. "Arthur's tomb is there." "Mordred!" he cried, and plunged into the lake. Wearing armor, he did not sink. Crimson smoke wrapped his feet, and he strode across the water as if it were solid, heading straight for the island. All the way he chanted Arthur's name, the sound rising in a keening crescendo. No red knight blocked him this time. Mordred reached the small island, treading among apple trees. "Let's go," Scott said. He left the leopards hovering and transfigured the sled into a small boat. He didn't call for Serene. He and Savannah took the oars and rowed toward the island at a relaxed pace. "It's too quiet," Savannah murmured. The apple trees hid whatever lay beyond them. "Medea's here too." Scott looked to the opposite shore and saw Medea and Aaron stepping from the woods. "Just the two of them?" Savannah sounded surprised. "Are you well?" Aaron waved cheerfully. "Doing well." He shivered, half playfully. "How cold. Dear sister, why don't you row this way and pick me up?" "Our boat's too small for you," Savannah said dryly. "Good point." Aaron snapped his fingers and drew his short wooden staff. Vines surged up from the bank, braided together into a boat which dropped onto the water. The living vines disentangled silently, leaving the vessel to float. Aaron bowed theatrically to Medea. "Please." Medea stepped aboard and Aaron took the oars. "Race?" he called, grinning. "First to the island." Scott and Savannah ignored him and kept their pace. Aaron, without Medea's help, rowed furiously and soon brought his vine boat alongside theirs. He didn't press them. He was busy enough watching them. "It wasn't smooth for us," Aaron said brightly. "We lost several along the way." He spoke of death with an almost sunny tone. "My other sister Maeve was cut down by the Green Knight crossing the swamp. How tragic, eh?" Savannah turned a cold eye on him. "Do you have no guilt?" Aaron cocked his head. His smile widened into something almost jubilant. "Guilt? Why should I feel guilty?" He seemed genuinely puzzled. Maeve was foolish. In this world, foolish people don't last. Savannah's jaw tightened. "She was a fool," she said through clenched teeth. "You're right." Aaron, barely containing his mirth, looked at Savannah. "You two weren't close, right?" Savannah said nothing. Scott watched Medea. The sunset's light glowed on her face, no veil, no hat, accentuating the pallor of skin that seemed less than whole. Scott met her eyes. "See anything?" she asked. "Nothing," Scott answered flatly. "Your true form and your illusion are indistinguishable. No wonder I can't tell the difference." Medea's face did not change. "Because I couldn't take Tom's soul, I never fully recovered. Tom's curse stuck to me. My body hasn't fully turned back to flesh. It may even have regressed." "Can you be healed here?" Scott asked. Medea smiled a mysterious, unreadable smile. "Who knows?" Then she turned her gaze toward the island and asked, "Did you find anything else in the forest?" "A pack of frenzied unicorns," Scott replied bluntly. "They seemed corrupted by something, completely mad." Medea nodded, though Scott could not tell whether she believed him. "Pity," she said softly. "We meant nothing.